Hey guys, tonight we begin with a world powdered in soot and propriety, but humming quietly with opium, ether, and laudanum under every lace glove. The Victorians may have been buttoned up on the outside, but their medicine cabinets could drop a horse. You're about to wander through drawing rooms that reek faintly of morphine and tea parties that start polite but end in hallucinations. So before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You stand on a foggy London street, where the gas lamps hum faintly and every cobblestone looks like it's holding a secret. The air smells of coal smoke and damp wool, and somewhere a carriage wheel screeches like it's trying to escape the century. You pull your collar up, not for warmth, but because everyone else does. That's the trick here. Appear proper, appear fine, appear respectable. You can be addicted to anything, as long as you don't look like you are. You pass a gentleman in a top hat whose pupils are the size of shillings. He tips his hat with a trembling hand. You nod back, pretending not to notice the glass bottle half hidden in his pocket. Everyone pretends. That's the social contract of this age. We do not discuss our medicine unless it's someone else's. Respectability isn't just a performance, it's a survival tactic. You feel it in the stiffness of your posture, the careful way you walk through the fog as though God himself might. Be watching from the corner of Baker Street. The women glide by in crinolines, their faces powdered, their smiles serene, their handbags rattling faintly with glass. A bottle of laudanum weighs almost nothing, but you can hear its presence in the way they walk. You think of breakfast tables lined with silver spoons and ceramic cups. The toast is burnt, the tea is weak, and the conversation is even weaker. Then, with the grace of routine, someone pours a few drops of dark amber liquid into their tea. Not for indulgence, of course, but for the nerves. Everyone has nerves these days. The world is moving too fast, railways, factories, telegrams. Civilization is exhausting. It's only natural to have a little help getting through the morning. The irony is that the same people preaching restraint are the ones dosing themselves to the edge of hallucination. The vicar warns about vice, then reaches for his tonic when his sermons begin to blur. The doctor prescribes laudanum like it's mercy in a bottle, and sometimes, for a while, it smooths the rough edges of grief, dulls the ache of cold, stretches time just enough to make the world bearable. You can almost forgive them for wanting to stay there. You walk past a shop window filled with glass jars and polite poison. Soothing syrup, tincture of poppy, Dr. Bateman's relief. Each label written in a confident hand that implies it knows what it's doing. You know better now. They all know better now. But back then, the line between healing and escape was a fog thicker than the one in the streets. You follow that thought to a sitting room, lit by the soft flicker of a gas lamp. A woman in lace gloves sips from a small blue bottle. Her husband reads the Times, pretending not to notice the way her eyelids flutter halfway closed. Their house is silent, apart from the tick of the clock and the slow exhale of someone floating far away. It's not scandalous. It's not shameful. It's medicine. When you step back outside, the city feels alive in a strange way. Not awake, but pulsing an empire in gentle delirium. The postmen, the poets, the seamstresses, the soldiers, they're all running on something. Laudanum, gin, ether, hope. Each person wrapped in a cocoon of private comfort, while the factories cough smoke into the night sky. You realize the true miracle of the Victorian age isn't the steam engine or the telegraph. It's how an entire civilization managed to stay slightly high without admitting it. And yet, there's something deeply human in it. You understand why they reached for the bottle, why they whispered for the apothecary to refill it before the neighbors could see. Pain was everywhere, then physical, emotional, industrial. It crept through the walls and settled in the bones. Medicine was the only mercy they could buy over the counter. The fog thickens, curling around your boots, and you can almost hear the sigh of the city, a quiet, drugged hum that never really stops. Somewhere, a church bell tolls, but it sounds soft, far away, like it's underwater. You take one last look at the tidy brick houses, each one hiding a little bottle on the mantel or tucked in a drawer. Behind every curtain, someone is chasing calm in liquid form. Respectability, you realize, isn't the opposite of vice. It's just the costume it wears. You step inside the chemist's shop, where the air is sharp with mint, alcohol, and something faintly metallic that sticks to the back of your throat. The bell above the door jingles, but no one looks up. Shelves climb the walls like wooden cathedrals, lined with bottles in every shape and shade, amber, cobalt, green, each one labeled in looping handwriting that promises calm, vigor, or at the very least, something interesting. A cat sleeps on the counter beside a stack of ledgers, looking like it knows too much and cares too little. The chemist himself appears from behind a curtain, wiping his hands on a rag that's already lost the war against stains. His spectacles magnify his eyes to twice their normal size, which makes him look permanently alarmed, but his voice is smooth and practiced. He asks what ails you in the same tone a priest might ask for a confession. Behind him, rows of powders and tinctures gleam under lamplight, and you can tell that most of them are stronger than he's admitting. He gestures toward the shelves, each section devoted to a particular kind of suffering. Bottles for sleeplessness, tonics for melancholy, elixirs for nervous exhaustion. You wonder briefly how anyone survives this century without being diagnosed as nervously exhausted. He picks up a small glass vial, shakes it gently, and says it will steady the heart, quiet the mind, perhaps even lift the spirits. What he doesn't say is that it will also make the wallpaper breathe if you take too much. You watch him work, measuring drops of liquid with the reverence of someone, handling secrets rather than medicine. There's a rhythm to it. The clink of glass, the soft thud of cork stoppers, the scratch of quill on parchment as he records every sale in his ledger. The handwriting is elegant, but you notice the repetition. The same names appear again and again, always buying the same tonic for the nerves. London's most anxious citizens are also its most loyal customers. The smell intensifies as he pours, a cocktail of lavender oil, camphor, and alcohol strong enough to pickle memory. He explains that laudanum is still the most reliable remedy, safe enough for ladies and gentlefolk, even children, if properly diluted. He says it all so politely you almost forget that properly diluted is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. The bottle he hands you is warm from his hands, stoppered and labeled in tidy script. Take as needed. You ask what happens if you take too much. He smiles in that vague professional way that says, "That's not my problem," and glances toward the door, where another customer has entered, a woman wrapped in a shawl, eyes darting like she's afraid someone might see her. You realize this shop is less a business and more a quiet confessional for the city's hidden desperation. No one comes here for a cure. They come for permission to keep going. The woman waits near the shelves of women's tonics, each one boasting miraculous effects on mood, complexion, and marital tolerance. The chemist measures something dark and viscous into a vial, ties a bow around it, and whispers that it's discreet. She leaves as silently as she came, clutching the bottle like a rosary. The door closes, and the bell gives a soft, almost guilty ring. You glance around again and notice the advertisements pasted behind the counter. glowing testimonials from satisfied customers who claim they were cured of everything from heartbreak to hysteria. You know better. You've seen what cured looks like after the 5th dose. But you also understand the appeal. In a world that measures worth in composure, these bottles offer the illusion of control. Just a few drops, and the chaos recedes. The world tilts back into something manageable. The chemist returns to the counter, counting coins and humming softly. You realize he's not a villain. He's a mirror. People bring him their fear, their loneliness, their sleepless nights, and he gives them something to hold in return. He sells hope by the ounce and sanity by the drop. You step back into the street, bottle in hand, the fog swallowing you like a secret. Around you, the city continues its slow, nervous heartbeat, factories groaning, carriage wheels clattering. Somewhere a piano playing a tune that sounds both hopeful and tired. You wonder how many bottles like yours are out there tonight, tucked into coat pockets and bedside drawers, tiny anchors for people pretending not to drift. The label catches the lamplight as you walk. Take as needed. You suspect that's what everyone in this city has been doing all along. The morning begins like every other gray, damp, and already too polite for its own good. The house smells faintly of toast, coal smoke, and something sweet that doesn't belong at the breakfast table. You sit down, trying not to wrinkle your newspaper, and watch as the silverware glints under a weak London sun. Across from you, someone is stirring their tea with a little too much concentration. The spoon clinks against the porcelain, and for a moment, you could almost mistake the scene for ordinary. But then comes the faint hiss of a cork, the quiet splash of amber into china, and you realize you're witnessing the most socially acceptable addiction in Britain. Laudanum doesn't announce itself. It's not gin, vulgar and loud, or tobacco, staining fingers and conscience alike. It's graceful, medical, respectable. Mothers keep it in the cupboard beside the sugar. Poets keep it on their desks, beside unfinished manuscripts and the sick well. Everyone is a little sick these days. The label says for nerves, sleeplessness, and melancholia. You could almost laugh at the understatement. If the Victorians had a national sport, it would be melancholia. You watch the liquid bloom in the teacup, turning the water the color of autumn leaves. The scent is faintly floral, faintly chemical, and entirely deceptive. It looks like honey, tastes like mercy, and leaves a trail of slow warmth that coils around the spine. It's not dramatic. It's not ruinous. It's just nice. That's the trick. It doesn't crash into you, it creeps. By the time the second cup is poured, conversation feels smoother. The fog outside a little less oppressive. The ache in the joints eases. The tightness behind the eyes loosens. You feel yourself softening at the edges, like wax near a candle flame. The world hasn't changed, only your ability to tolerate it. Somewhere in that slow unraveling, the breakfast table becomes a sanctuary. You can't help noticing how easily it slips into daily life. Children are given drops to quiet their crying. Soldiers take it for phantom pains. Housewives keep it for female troubles, a term so vague it could mean anything from heartbreak to boredom. The doctor says it's safer than whiskey. The clergyman calls it a blessing, and the apothecary smiles without quite meeting your eyes. Everyone agrees it helps. No one asks what it helps you forget. Outside, carriages rumble past, their wheels cutting through the slush. Inside, the clock ticks softly, but time feels different now, stretched thin and syrupy. You glance at the bottle on the counter, small, elegant, unassuming, and realize that civilization's calm might depend entirely on that fragile glass. You imagine breakfast tables across the city, thousands of them, each one performing the same quiet ritual. A few drops for peace, a few more for endurance. You think of the poets, those pale figures hunched over ink-stained pages, convinced that truth lives at the bottom of a bottle. Some of them are right. For a while, the words come easier, the world makes more sense. Pain becomes beautiful, and sleep feels optional. But morning always arrives, demanding rent for the night before. You've seen it, the trembling hands, the hollow eyes, the way they smile through it and call it inspiration. It's almost funny how something so small can hold an empire together. Laudanum bridges the gap between classes better than any reform ever could. The poor take it for pain, the rich take it for ennui, and both call it medicine. It's the one thing everyone can agree on. Life hurts, and this helps. The rest is just dosage. As you finish your tea, a familiar haze settles in. The walls seem warmer, the light softer, your thoughts less sharp. You can hear the city faintly through the window, the vendors shouting, the church bells ringing, but they sound far, away, like echoes from another life. You reach for the newspaper again, pretending to read, but the words slide off the page like water. It doesn't matter. The news is always bad, and you're finally calm enough not to care. Across the table, the bottle sits half empty, catching the morning light in its amber belly. You think about how many breakfasts it shared, how many sighs it softened. The Victorians may build railways and write symphonies, but this is their true invention. Chemical serenity disguised as routine. The clock ticks again, and for a moment, you almost believe you could live like this forever. But somewhere, deep beneath the calm, there's a whisper that you're not as in control as you look. You ignore it, the way everyone does, and pour one last careful splash into your tea. Civilization requires composure, after all. And composure, in this century, comes in liquid form. You learn quickly that the secret to surviving the upper crust is all in the quick performance. The handshakes are firm but never eager, the laughter measured, and the pain. Well, pain is to be dealt with privately, and preferably chemically. You sit in a drawing room upholstered in velvet and silence, watching as a man with the jawline of a marble statue discreetly adjusts his cuff. He's not nervous, though his hand trembles faintly. He's merely due for his medicine. Morphine, the miracle cure of modernity, is everything the Victorians love. Elegant, efficient, and discreet. It doesn't slur your words like gin or stain your breath like rum. It glides through the veins like silk. The upper classes adore it precisely because it allows them to fall apart gracefully. You can be in the full bloom of hysteria 1 minute and serenely composed the next, all without a hair out of place. You watch as the butler glides in, silver tray in hand. On it sits a delicate syringe case, polished to a mirror sheen. There's something reverent about the way it's handled, as though it were a chalice rather than a delivery system for chemical oblivion. The lady of the house excuses herself politely, murmuring something about her neuralgia, and everyone nods in solemn understanding. Neuralgia is a very fashionable affliction this season. Upstairs, she draws the curtains and opens the case. The morphine is measured with precision too little, and the pain lingers too much, and one might miss supper. She ties a ribbon around her arm, the way her doctor showed her, and for a moment she looks like she's about to commit a minor sin. But then the needle slides in, the pain dissolves, and virtue returns to her posture. Downstairs, conversation continues about the Queen's latest appearance, none the wiser that Her Majesty's subjects are politely anesthetized. You can't help noticing how organized it all is. The same society that faints at the sight of an exposed ankle will calmly jab itself with morphine before luncheon. Doctors make house calls with silver-tipped syringes, prescribing doses that sound more like etiquette than medicine. One for breakfast, another before bed, perhaps a smaller one before the opera, if the nerves demand it. Addiction isn't even the right word yet. It's simply refinement. The men are no different. In clubs thick with cigar smoke and quiet desperation, gentlemen nurse their injections between rounds of billiards. A touch of morphine keeps the hands steady, the mind focused. It's good for gout, rheumatism, and inconvenient emotions. Business deals close more smoothly when everyone's politely sedated. You realize that under all the starch and propriety, this empire runs on denial and diluted euphoria. But the trick isn't the drug, it's the disguise. The bottles are labeled tonic, the powders, compound, the syringes, therapeutic instruments. No one says the word addiction. That would be vulgar. Instead, they say things like habit or necessity, words that sound almost respectable when spoken over fine china. The apothecary keeps the secrets, the servants keep the schedule, and everyone pretends they're just maintaining their health. You sit through a dinner where laughter sparkles like crystal, and no one's eyes quite focus the same way twice. The conversation drifts from politics to poetry, to the best seaside resorts for convalescence, a euphemism that means places to fall apart in peace. The lady next to you smiles too brightly, her pupils wide as coins. Her hand brushes yours as she reaches for her glass, and you feel the faint tremor that betrays her composure. She hides it with a sip of sherry and a compliment about the flowers. Later, as the guests depart, the host lingers by the fireplace. He tells you his physician has discovered a marvelous balance of doses small enough to function, large enough to forget. He says it like he's sharing an investment tip, and maybe he is. The future, after all, belongs to those who can numb themselves efficiently. When you step out into the fog, the street feels strangely quiet, as if the whole city is holding its breath. Behind each curtained window, someone is lighting a lamp, drawing a syringe, whispering reassurances to themselves that this, too, is simply medicine. The carriages rattle by, wheels splashing through puddles that reflect the gaslights like diluted stars. You realize then that addiction in the upper class isn't a fall from grace, it's an accessory. Something worn invisibly, like a corset beneath silk. They don't stumble or slur, they float. Their secret is discipline, their downfall, discretion. No one ever suspects the people who never raise their voices. No one questions the calmest room in the house. You walk through the narrow streets of Whitechapel, where the fog isn't fog at all, but the ghost of coal and cheap liquor. The air itself feels fermented. Every doorway hums with the same exhausted rhythm. A baby crying, a man coughing, a woman laughing too loudly to sound happy. The gin shops are everywhere, tucked between pawnbrokers and bakeries that sell more sawdust than bread. Inside, the light is yellow and the floor sticky, and the sound of coins clinking is as constant as breathing. Gin is the people's comfort, the cure for hunger, cold, and hopelessness. It costs less than a meal and works faster than prayer. You watch a woman in a threadbare shawl hand over her last penny for a measure that could burn through grief or just her throat, depending on the day. She drinks it in one gulp, winces, and exhales a cloud of something like peace. For the poor, intoxication isn't rebellion, it's survival with a dash of mercy. You wander deeper into the alley where the taverns lean against each other like drunks at closing time. The walls drip with condensation, or maybe spilled gin, it's hard to tell. Men slump over tables, their faces red from drink or wind or both. Someone singing a hymn in a key that doesn't exist. The whole place smells like desperation disguised as celebration. You realize that here, no one bothers hiding their intoxication. There's no pretense, no shame in being undone. They've already been stripped of everything worth pretending for. But a few streets over, in drawing rooms lined with velvet and restraint, another kind of intoxication unfolds. The air smells of beeswax and privilege. A maid delivers a small glass vial to a woman in lace, who thanks her without looking up. Laudanum, the drinkable cousin of oblivion. It's elegant, odorless, and conveniently legal. The rich don't need taverns. They have tinctures. You sip politely, call it tonic, and nobody whispers behind their gloves. The irony is exquisite. Gin is condemned as moral decay, but laudanum is prescribed as refinement. One is a public sin, the other a private treatment. You can stagger in an alley and be called a criminal, or lie trembling in a canopy bed and be called delicate. It's the same escape, poured into different bottles. One reeks of juniper and grime. The other tastes faintly of roses and denial. You think of the newspapers, full of righteous fury about gin-soaked degenerates destroying society. The writers, of course, are writing with hands that tremble for their own reason. Somewhere between editorials on temperance and empire, they pause for a few drops of laudanum to clear the head. Everyone condemns the poor for drowning their sorrows, but no one questions the rich for numbing theirs. Suffering, it seems, is only shameful when it's visible. You cross the invisible border between the classes, the one that smells like disinfectant and hypocrisy. On one side, gin glows in glass cups under flickering gaslight. On the other, laudanum sits in crystal decanters beside silver spoons. Both hum with the same quiet promise to soften the edges of reality, if only for a moment. You realize that the empire's moral backbone is built on two kinds of intoxication, one disdained, one disguised. Somewhere, a reformer gives a speech about saving the working class from vice. He's pale and trembling, his own bottle hidden in his waistcoat. He insists that gin ruins families, never mentioning how laudanum quietly dissolves them too. You can almost admire the efficiency of it all. The poor collapse loudly, in public, where everyone can feel superior about it. The rich collapse silently, behind closed doors, where they can call it treatment. As the night deepens, the streets grow quieter. The gin shops close, but the parlor lights stay on. Somewhere, a baby wails as his mother sleeps through the sound, her body warm from laudanum. Somewhere else, a man lies in the gutter, empty bottle beside him, dreaming the same dream for a softer world, for one night of peace. You look between the two and realize they're not opposites. They're reflections. Both worlds are chasing the same thing: relief. From the centuries' relentless noise, from poverty, from pressure, from being human. The difference isn't the craving, it's who can afford to hide it. And in that realization, the city makes a strange kind of sense. The empire runs on progress, pain, and politely sanctioned poison. You wander through a narrow alley that smells of rain, tobacco, and too many stories told by people who weren't really there. Somewhere beneath your feet, London exhales. The city's underbelly hums with rumor, and at the center of it all is the opium den, the forbidden dreamscape every newspaper loves to describe, and every moralist pretends not to imagine. You've seen the illustrations. Shadowy rooms thick with smoke, pale figures sprawled on couches. Chinese men with sinister smiles passing pipes to lost English souls. It's lurid, exotic, and like most Victorian fears, only half true. The truth is less theatrical. You duck through a doorway on Limehouse Causeway and step into a room that's small, dim, and disappointingly ordinary. No silk curtains, no mystical chanting, no faintly glowing dragon statues, just a few men lying on straw mats, half awake, half anywhere. The smoke curls lazily toward the ceiling, carrying that unmistakable bittersweet scent, the one that's supposed to bring both heaven and ruin. You cough softly, and a man in a frayed waistcoat waves you toward an empty corner, as if this is just another cafe, and you've interrupted his breakfast. Opium dens, as the papers describe them, are dens of depravity, foreign corruption seeping into pure British veins. What they really are is quieter, sadder, more human. The people here aren't looking for sin, they're looking for silence. You sit on a low stool, and the floor creaks beneath you. Someone hands you a pipe, long and delicate, the bowl carved from bone. The man beside you inhales deeply, exhales slower, and smiles with a peace you haven't seen anywhere above ground. You realize this isn't a ritual of wickedness, it's escape, plain and simple. The dock workers, sailors, laborers, they come here to forget the noise of the city, the sting of salt in their hands, The endless grind of days that all look the same. Opium doesn't promise happiness. It promises absence. A few hours where the world softens and memory drifts out the door. But that's not the story London wants to hear. The polite world needs villains and victims, not context. It's easier to blame the Chinaman and his poison than the empire that ships tons of opium across the seas. The hypocrisy is enough to choke on. Britain wages wars to protect its right to sell the same drug it criminalizes at home. The public knows this, vaguely, but prefers its nightmares tidy and foreign. The evil must always live somewhere else. You study the faces in the room. There's no menace here, no wild delirium, just a collection of people adrift in a fog they built themselves. A man murmurs softly, in Cantonese, another in Cockney, both lost in the same translation of oblivion. Outside these walls, they have nothing in common. Inside, they share the only equality the century truly allows: exhaustion. You think of the writers who came here hunting decadence, chasing inspiration, the way others chase God. They'd smoke once, scribble about visions of hell and ecstasy, and then flee back to the safety of their clean parlors, clutching the moral high ground like a souvenir. Their words painted this place as a den of vice, not a refuge. They made it monstrous because that sold papers and absolved guilt. It's a neat trick. Really condemn the same addiction that fuels your empire. Just shift the lighting and blame the accents. A woman enters, her dress simple, her eyes far older than her face. She walks like someone who stopped asking the world for mercy. She lies down, takes the pipe, and breathes deeply. In that moment, she looks weightless. The opium won't fix anything it never does but for her. For a little while, it will make everything quieter. You stay until the lamplight flickers and the air grows thick enough to feel. The smoke clings to your clothes, seeps into your hair, and for a fleeting moment you understand the pull. The stillness is seductive. The world outside feels too loud, too sharp. You rise anyway. The man with the pipe nods, neither surprised nor interested. People come and go. The city forgets them all the same. When you step back into the alley, the fog outside feels cleaner than the air you left behind, but emptier too. Somewhere above, a church bell tolls, muffled and distant, as if it too is half asleep. You glance back once and see the faint glow of lamplight through the cracks of the door. The myth lives on in the newspapers, all smoke and fear. The truth, though, is smaller, sadder, and infinitely more familiar. It isn't about corruption, it's about exhaustion, the universal kind that makes anyone, rich or poor, dream of a softer world, even if it comes from a pipe. You arrive at a townhouse, glowing with too many lamps and not enough shame. The air outside smells faintly of rain and horse dung, but as the door opens, it's replaced by something sweeter ether, sharp and chemical, like alcohol that's gone to finishing school. The parlor is already full, a bubbling mix of laughter, perfume, and scientific enthusiasm that's about 5 minutes from becoming chaos. Someone's playing the piano a little too fast. Someone else is quoting Shelley. And on the table in the center of it all sits a glass jar that looks suspiciously medical. You realize you're not at a party in the traditional sense. You're at an experiment, one that everyone's pretending is respectable. The host, a man in an embroidered waistcoat and the sort of confidence only inherited wealth can buy, raises the jar like it's a relic. He calls it divine inspiration in liquid form. Everyone applauds as if he's just announced a cure for death. He dips a cloth into the ether and passes it around. One by one, guests press it to their faces and inhale, giggling as though sin can be sterilized if it smells clinical enough. You hesitate, but curiosity has a way of outweighing common sense in rooms like this. When it's your turn, the vapor bites cold at first, then turns warm, then not there at all. The edges of the room blur, and your thoughts untether, floating upward like bubbles in champagne. Someone's reciting poetry about consciousness, Another person is lying on the carpet, laughing at the ceiling, which has apparently said something very funny. You don't feel drunk, not exactly. You feel like you've slipped between layers of reality, where everything is both profound and profoundly stupid. Ether, you realize, is the perfect Victorian drug. It's industrial, respectable, and invented by scientists. It doesn't reek of vice, like gin or opium. It's progress, bottled and flammable. Even the clergy find it hard to condemn something that sounds like a scientific discovery. And it's so democratic, doctors use it in surgery, socialites use it for fun, and every so often, someone uses it to forget the century altogether. Across the room, a woman in emerald silk is explaining that the sensation proves the existence of the soul. You're not sure about that, but you do notice she's trying very hard not to fall off her chair. The host inhales deeply again and starts laughing so hard he nearly drops the jar. And for a moment, you can almost see the absurdity crystallize the empire's brightest minds, huffing anesthetic in pursuit of enlightenment. It's both ridiculous and, somehow, entirely fitting. The party spins onward, faster now, louder. Someone decides to test the flammability of ether by holding a candle too close, and suddenly half the guests are waving fans and shrieking with delight. The piano player slumps forward, giggling between chords. No one's really in control, but no one seems to mind. You begin to understand why people call it spiritual. For a few precious minutes, the body forgets it's mortal. The mind hovers somewhere light and painless, and the world feels like a place that might actually make sense. Then, as quickly as it came, the euphoria begins to fade. The laughter slows. People blink as though waking from a dream they didn't mean to end. The room smells stronger now, ether, sweat, something faintly metallic. The air feels heavy, like it's judging everyone. Someone mutters that the fumes are bad for the lungs. Another insists it's perfectly safe, citing an article from a medical journal no one has read. The host claps his hands and calls for more music, desperate to pull the room back into its delirium. But the magic's already slipping through the cracks. You step toward the window and open it just enough to let in a breath of cold night air. Outside, the city looks unchanged. The same fog, the same gaslight glow, the same horses clopping past, indifferent to human transcendence. You take another breath and realize the ether smell is still clinging to your clothes. You wonder what this will look like to future generations, whether they'll laugh or envy, whether they'll call it foolish or visionary. Probably both. Behind you, the laughter starts again, a little forced this time. Someone spills a glass of sherry. Someone else quotes Shakespeare badly. The moment of revelation has dissolved into something more ordinary, a hangover in progress. You turn back, just as the host raises the jar again, eyes gleaming. He declares that humanity has never been closer to understanding itself. Everyone cheers, half believing him. You almost do too, and yet, as you leave, the night air hits your face with the crispness of truth. It's not enlightenment they're chasing in that room, it's absence. The same absence that fills every bottle and vial in the city. The Victorians just found a way to inhale it with better manners. You open the cabinet and find the century's optimism bottled neatly beside the bandages. The labels promise energy, clarity, and moral improvement, though you suspect only 2 of those are true. The jar of cocaine powder sits between a box of smelling salts and a bottle of castor oil. Perfectly ordinary, perfectly respectable. No one hides it because no one thinks they should. You can buy it from any chemist, carry it in your purse, or sprinkle it into your headache remedy. The Victorians call it medicine, but the sparkle in their eyes tells another story. Doctors adore it. They call it a marvel, a stimulant for the weary, and a cure for nearly everything that plagues modern life. Melancholia, asthma, toothache, exhaustion, even shyness. Surgeons praise it for numbing pain without dulling precision, and poets whisper that it sharpens thought. You begin to notice it everywhere. woven into two speak in the daily rituals of civility. Mothers slip a little into children's tonics to make them more agreeable. Clerks use it to work longer hours without noticing the clock. Travelers take it to endure long train rides and longer conversations, and everyone agrees it works beautifully. You watch a doctor preparing his kit for the day, arranging bottles and powders like a priest setting up an altar. The cocaine is measured out carefully, a few grains on the tip of a silver spoon, stirred into a tincture of wine or glycerin. He explains, with scientific pride, that this substance invigorates the nerves, awakens the senses, and eliminates the troublesome need for rest. You suspect he's been sampling his own success, judging by the way his words are starting to outrun his breath. Across town, a woman sits at her vanity, pale and elegant, dabbing a bit of cocaine-infused cream beneath her eyes. It's said to whiten the complexion, smooth the skin, and chase away the shadows that come from existing as a Victorian woman. She hums softly, the same tune she always hums when she's trying not to think. In her purse is a small tin labeled Vin Mariani, a fashionable drink made with Bordeaux wine and a generous dose of coca leaf extract. She takes a sip, and the world brightens by half a shade. She can face another afternoon of faint smiles and fainting couches. You can't help but admire the efficiency of it all. The Victorians found a way to bottle confidence, and no one seems particularly inclined to ask questions. The newspapers call it a miracle of science, proof that progress is winning the war against weakness. Cocaine is modernity itself, fast, dazzling, unstoppable. Even Freud swears by it, declaring it the key to treating depression, addiction, and possibly the meaning of life. He's wrong about the last two, but no one knows that yet. The pharmacies capitalize on the craze. Advertisements bloom across newspapers, promising instant vitality. Toothache drops, throat lozenges, hair tonics, all laced with the same glittering ingredient. There's even a line of cigarettes for delicate throats that deliver cocaine straight to the lungs. Housewives buy them in bulk. The idea of addiction doesn't enter the conversation because that word doesn't quite exist yet, not for the respectable. You visit a family at dinner and watch as the father, weary from work, pours a few drops of coca wine into his glass. The mother has already taken hers mixed with lemonade, calling it her tonic for nerves. Even the teenage son gets a taste doctor's orders for his lack of concentration. The laughter grows louder, brighter, and no one notices how forced it sounds. The meal feels like an advertisement for progress. Everyone glows, but no one looks alive. Then there's the crash, quiet and private, like all Victorian suffering. The mornings that come too early, the shaking hands, the blurred thoughts. But those moments don't make the newspapers. The world loves its miracles more than it loves its aftermath. When the high fades, they simply call for another spoonful, another sip, another cure. Cocaine doesn't make them happy, it just makes happiness unnecessary. You close the cabinet and catch your reflection in the glass, a face framed by optimism and denial. The shelves are still full of promises, tonics for every ache, powders for every mood, cures for every doubt. It's comforting to believe in progress, in something you can measure, swallow, or stir into tea. But as the city hums outside, powered by ambition and exhaustion, you can't help but think that maybe the Victorians didn't invent medicine at all. Maybe they just found prettier ways to fall apart. You watch as a woman leans toward her mirror, the kind with a gilded frame and a flattering tilt that lies for a living. Morning light filters through lace curtains, catching the fine dust in the air, and in that dust, something glitters faintly, almost beautifully. The powder she pats onto her skin looks harmless, soft as snow, but it carries a whisper of death. She knows it. Everyone knows it. But knowing and caring are very different things. Beauty, in this century, comes with a half-life. She calls it her complexion powder, though the chemist's label reads arsenic. It promises purity, radiance, and a skin tone somewhere between porcelain and illusion. The box even has an angel on it, wings outstretched, as if heaven personally endorses vanity. You can smell it, faintly metallic, bitter, like rain on stone. She dabs her cheeks with care, chasing the fashionable pallor that says wealth, refinement, and enough free time to never stand in the sun. The mirror doesn't tell her what you can see. The faint bluish hue around her lips, the brittle texture of her hair, the trembling fingers that can't quite hold still. The powder hides the sickness while feeding it, a perfect metaphor for Victorian beauty standards. You watch her smile at her reflection, and for a moment, she looks ethereal. Then she coughs, soft and polite, into a lace handkerchief she'll burn later. Arsenic is the secret no one keeps. It sits in every vanity drawer, woven through the fabric of fashion. There are soaps to brighten the complexion, tonics to purify the blood, wafers to enhance vitality. Each one contains just enough poison to make you feel alive on the way to dying. The magazines call it progress, chemistry harnessed for elegance. The husbands call it indulgence. The doctors call it unfortunate but not entirely surprising. You think of the advertisements plastered across shop windows, glowing women with eyes too wide and skin too white, holding tiny tins that promise transformation. They never mention the side effects: nausea, hair loss, the subtle decay of organs. Those are merely the price of perfection. And in a society where beauty is a woman's best currency, what's a few ounces of arsenic compared to respectability? At soirée, the glow of candlelight flatters the deception. Faces gleam with that soft, otherworldly pallor, and everyone praises the same illusion. "How luminous you look," someone says, and the compliment lands like an absolution. No one sees the faint tremor when a glass of champagne is lifted, or the way her smile tightens for just a second too long. The poison is slow, almost courteous. It kills with patience. You visit the apothecary that sells these miracles, and the shelves gleam with bottles like tiny promises. The shopkeeper assures you it's safe in moderation. Everything is safe in moderation, even arsenic, even hypocrisy. He says it strengthens the nerves, refines the features, and besides, Queen Victoria's cousin supposedly uses it. It's difficult to argue with royalty, even when they're pale, for reasons unrelated to fashion. At home, she unwraps a new box of wafers, delicate as communion bread. The instructions advise taking one daily, preferably before bed. The taste is chalky with a metallic afterbite, but she smiles anyway, because this is what devotion looks like. She believes that beauty is a kind of discipline, and she practices it religiously. You can almost admire the determination, the quiet courage it takes to poison yourself politely. Weeks pass, and the glow fades into something ghostly. The radiance remains, but it's the kind you see in marble statues. The doctor calls it exhaustion. The priest calls it mysterious. The chemist says perhaps the formula was stronger than intended. No one calls it what it is. The world has never liked naming the things it encourages. You stand at her dressing table after she's gone. The powder box sits open, the puff resting on top, still dusted with white. The mirror reflects the room back at you, empty and perfect, the kind of stillness that only follows devotion. On the label, the angel still smiles, wings unfurled, promising eternal beauty. It's hard not to think the promise came true, just not in the way anyone intended. You pick up the bottle because the label looks harmless enough: pastel colors, looping script, the comforting promise of Mother Winslow's soothing syrup. It sounds like something gentle, something safe. You imagine a tired parent, a crying child, the endless clatter of a city that never sleeps. You imagine mercy in liquid form. But when you tilt the bottle toward the light, the word leaps out at you from the fine print: morphine. The kind of ingredient that doesn't soothe so much as silence. The syrup sits on the pharmacy shelf beside teething powders and stomach tonics, a parade of comfort wrapped in Victorian trust. Every mother knows the name. Every doctor recommends it. The advertisements show cherubic babies sleeping peacefully, mothers smiling with serene relief. None of them show what comes after the silence too deep, the stillness that lingers too long. You read the dosage instructions and notice how small the measurements are, how confident the directions sound. 1 teaspoon for calm, 2 for sleep. No warnings, no hesitation. You can see the logic behind it. Children cry, and crying sounds like failure in a world obsessed with composure. No one wants to admit how loud poverty can be, how desperate exhaustion feels. The syrup works. It quiets the chaos. It gives mothers a moment to breathe, to wash the dishes, to pretend the world isn't crumbling around them. The chemists know this. They just don't call it what it is. To them, it's a product, a miracle, a reliable prophet with a floral label. In the nursery, a young mother measures a spoonful with shaking hands. She hums softly, a tune her own mother used to sing, the kind meant to carry babies towards sleep. The syrup glistens amber in the lamplight, thick and sweet. The baby's eyes flutter closed before she's even set the bottle down. Relief floods her, like warmth in winter. For the first time all day, the house is quiet. She doesn't ask how. She doesn't want to. The sound of silence becomes addictive in its own right. The syrup turns up in every home. The wealthy call it fashionable. The poor call it necessary. It soothes everything. Colic, coughing, teething, nightmares. The newspapers call it a godsend, a mother's helper for the modern age. You can almost hear the smugness in the copywriter's pen. The formula is simple: alcohol, morphine, sugar, and hope. Together, they build an empire of calm that hides a tragedy no one wants to acknowledge. You imagine the factories where the syrup is bottled, rows of workers pouring amber liquid into glass, sealing it with cork and good intentions. They probably don't think about what's inside, or maybe they do, and it's easier not to. Every industry in this century runs on denial. There's opium in medicine, arsenic in makeup, lead in water. A little morphine in. Baby formula feels almost ordinary by comparison. But the problem with silence is that it eventually draws attention. Doctors start to notice patterns. Babies who sleep too long, mothers who refill their bottles too quickly. Some call it infantile wasting, others failure to thrive, as if the language itself can soften the horror. The companies respond with new packaging, brighter colors, the same poison dressed as progress. The advertisements grow louder, more sentimental, insisting that good mothers use their syrup, that love and chemistry are the same thing. You can't blame them entirely. The world they live in doesn't forgive weakness, and motherhood is just another performance in the endless theater of Victorian virtue. No one has time for crying, not even babies. It's easier to medicate the noise away than to admit how fragile the system really is. The bottles line the shelves of nurseries like trophies, proof of control, of grace under pressure. Years later, when the truth finally surfaces, when doctors begin to whisper the word addiction, when the papers print the deaths in numbers too high to ignore, the shock will sound rehearsed. Society will clutch its pearls and ask how such a thing could happen. But you already know. You've read the label. You've seen the handwriting that curls beautifully around a lie. The bottle sits on the table, half empty now, the syrup clinging to the glass like guilt. You imagine the mother asleep in the next room, finally resting, and the baby's chest rising and falling slower with each breath. The house is quiet again, but it doesn't feel peaceful anymore. The kind of silence this syrup brings isn't mercy. It's a lullaby sung too far into the dark. You find yourself in a cramped study that smells of pipe smoke, ink, and sleeplessness. The wallpaper is stained with candle soot, the floor littered with crumpled pages and abandoned ideas. On the desk, between stacks of drafts and unpaid bills, sits the real author of the century's literature, a brown glass bottle of laudanum. Its label, faded and familiar, reads like a co-author's signature. You realize quickly that every brilliant sentence in this room was probably written on the brink of delirium. The poet in the corner barefoot, wild-eyed, muttering to himself, takes a sip from his glass and calls it clarity. He claims the opium sharpens the mind, opens the doors to unseen worlds, allows him to write what ordinary consciousness cannot. You watch his hand shake as he dips the pen into ink, his letters growing looser with each line. He writes about angels and despair and the shape of dreams. He believes he's communing with the divine, but really, he's just chasing coherence that slips through his fingers faster than ink dries. Writers in this age call laudanum many things: muse, medicine, miracle. They praise it in essays and footnotes, the way one might describe a friend with a dark sense of humor. Thomas de Quincey writes an entire confession to it, romanticizing his descent into dependency so beautifully that others follow, eager to meet the same fate for the sake of art. You can't tell whether they love the drug or the drama it provides. The Victorians are sentimental even in self-destruction. You walk through a smoky salon where creative minds gather like moths around the flame of genius and decay. There's laughter, argument, and the constant clink of glassware. A novelist, pale and brilliant, insists that without his daily dose, his imagination dries up entirely. His friends nod in sympathy. They've all read each other's work. They've all noticed the same pattern. The first chapters are luminous. The endings unravel. Inspiration bleeds into incoherence. The air is thick with contradiction artists who despise excess yet live entirely inside it. They speak of transcendence but can barely stand. You can't help but feel a strange tenderness watching them. These dreamers who believed their poison was a passport to eternity. They're sincere in their ruin. And maybe that's what makes them unforgettable. A woman in a velvet dress sits by the fire, her voice low, her words soaked in melancholy. She says laudanum makes the loneliness tolerable, the nights quieter. She writes poetry that feels like confession, but her readers only call it beautiful. You realize that in this world, suffering isn't just tolerated, it's fashionable. The public adores its tortured geniuses as long as the torment stays on the page. You flip through one of the poet's notebooks and see the progression: early pages, filled with tight, deliberate handwriting, followed by later ones that sprawl and twist into unreadable scrawl. The ink stains look almost like bruises. You wonder how many masterpieces began as desperate attempts to make sense of a chemical fog. The Victorians talk about art as transcendence, but you see what it really is: escape. The same. Hunger that drives a dock worker to gin, or a mother to laudanum, drives a writer to the bottle on his desk. The only difference is vocabulary. Outside, the rain starts, tapping at the window pane like an impatient critic. The poet doesn't notice. He's somewhere else entirely, drifting through a dream that feels like revelation. He smiles faintly, writes a line so luminous it almost hurts to read, and then sets down his pen. His eyes flutter closed. For a moment, you can't tell if he's thinking or fading. The line on the page gleams wet and perfect. It's the kind of sentence that will outlive him. The room grows quiet except for the rain and the faint rattle of glass on wood. You look around and see what no one here can admit: that every brilliant word is bought on credit, every vision borrowed against a body that can't afford it. The Victorians will turn this kind of ruin into legend. They'll quote these men in drawing rooms, praise their genius, forget their shaking hands. You close the notebook gently and step back. The candle gutters low, shadows stretching across the desk. The poet exhales softly, a sound halfway between peace and surrender. The bottle catches the light for one last second before the flame dies out. You can't help thinking that maybe the greatest muse of the age wasn't inspiration at all. It was oblivion, disguised as genius, poured neatly into a glass. You stand at the threshold of the operating theater, a room that smells of iron, ether, and something vaguely holy. The light slants through high windows, slicing through the haze of antiseptic vapor that hangs in the air. A dozen medical students crowd the benches above, their notebooks open, faces pale with fascination and nausea. On the table below, lies a man draped in linen, motionless, except for the faint rise of his chest. The surgeon stands beside him, sleeves rolled up, jaw set, and eyes glazed not with focus, but something softer, dreamier. You realize the surgeon isn't just performing the operation, he's surviving it. Ether hovers thick in the air, sweet and sharp at once. The bottle on the tray gleams like salvation. For the patient, it's a mercy, an end to the screams that once echoed through these tiled halls. For the surgeon, it's a temptation. He tilts the bottle toward a cloth, pours too generously, then inhales deeply through his own handkerchief. The students exchange glances, pretending not to see. He exhales slowly, steadies his trembling hand, and begins to cut. Medicine in this century is still part performance, part prayer. The surgeon must appear calm, even when the blood says otherwise. He can't afford to tremble. So he does what many of his colleagues quietly do, shares a little of the patient's comfort. Ether dulls the nerves, blurs the edges, quiets the terror of knowing exactly how fragile life is when it's open in front of you. You can almost understand him. As the operation continues, you notice the rhythm of it precise, mechanical, strangely graceful. The instruments gleam in the light, the soft hiss of breath and heartbeat blending with the whisper of steel. The surgeon's movements are too smooth now, his voice almost too gentle. He's humming something under his breath. Maybe a hymn, maybe a memory. The students scribble furiously, unaware that they're watching the slow birth of modern anesthesia and the quiet addiction that will follow it. Ether wasn't meant for indulgence. It was meant for mercy. But mercy has a way of spreading. Surgeons begin keeping small flasks in their coats, not just for patients but for themselves. A sniff before a long operation, a sip after a difficult one. Soon it's not just hospitals that smell like ether. It's drawing rooms, private studies, entire lives quietly evaporating into sweet vapor. The papers call it progress, and they're not wrong. Pain is no longer inevitable. It can be negotiated, but there's a cost to taming pain. Once you learn how to numb it, you can't stop wondering what else can be quieted. The surgeon leans back, wipes his hands, and sways slightly. The patient sleeps on, oblivious, caught between two worlds. The air feels heavy with the irony of it all, the cure that comforts everyone except the one who gives it. You step closer and see the small details. The sweat glistening on the surgeon's brow, the faint tremor returning to his fingers, the way he stares at his reflection in the blood-spattered instrument tray as if to confirm he's still there. When the ether wears off, it's not just the patient who wakes up changed. The doctor does too, haunted by the awareness of what he's done and what he might do again. Afterward, the students applaud softly. The operation was a success. The man will live. The surgeon nods once, tight-lipped, and turns back to the tray. His hand lingers on the bottle longer than it should. The applause fades into the sound of footsteps, leaving, voices murmuring about technique and progress. When the room is empty, he takes one last breath of the sweet vapor, just enough to steady himself again. Outside, the hospital corridors buzz with the optimism of an age that believes pain is a problem science can solve. You pass rooms filled with sleeping patients, their bodies still under the influence of discovery. The nurses whisper about miracles. Somewhere, a child with a broken leg dreams peacefully for the first time in history. But you can't shake the image of the surgeon's eyes, bright, unfocused, too calm. The ether revolution has given humanity a gift, the power to separate pain from healing. But as you step into the crisp night air, you understand the quiet truth no one will publish. It didn't just change medicine. It changed what people were willing to feel. And for some, that numbness became the only thing worth chasing. You stand on the docks of London as crates are loaded onto ships bound for the east, each stamped with the seal of empire and the faint smell of something sweet and sinister. The workers move quickly, heads down, unaware or unwilling to remember that these neat wooden boxes contain the same substance that fills the veins of half the city's poets and the coffers of its merchants. The wind carries the scent of salt, smoke, and empire. Somewhere between the Thames and the horizon, morality gets lost at sea. Britain calls itself the moral light of the world now, a nation of sermons and Sunday schools, but the light burns on opium. The very thing it condemns at home is what it sells abroad. You can almost admire the efficiency of it turning addiction into empire, misery into commerce. The ships sail heavy with the drug, bound for China, where demand was manufactured long before anyone dared call it by that name. In the grand language of trade, it's not called poison, it's product. You follow the route on a map in the office of an East India Company official. He's proud, precise, and smells faintly of clove and ink. His hands glide across the parchment like a priest, blessing the faithful. He speaks of balance sheets, exports, markets. He never says opium. He says revenue. He says necessity. The empire, after all, must fund its progress. The money flows back to London, financing railways, universities, and gentlemen who will later write essays about the moral decay of the East. Meanwhile, across the sea, entire cities choke under the same dream Britain packages in glass bottles and brown powder. In China, smoke rises from dens, where men and women lie motionless in blue haze, their thoughts dissolved into nothingness. The emperor pleads for an end to the trade, sends letters, sends diplomats. London sends more ships. The papers print justifications, something about civilization, something about freedom of trade. When diplomacy fails, gunfire speaks for commerce. The first Opium War begins not over ideology, but inventory. Britain calls it defense of business. China calls it invasion. The empire wins, of course it always does, and takes ports, indemnities, and the right to keep poisoning the world in peace. The irony is almost beautiful in its precision. The nation that prides itself on moral superiority has built its fortune on addiction. At home, it lectures the poor about vice. Abroad, it sells it wholesale. You wander through the streets of London again, this time through its richer districts. The lamps glow warm in the fog, lighting windows filled with silk and tea, all paid for by the misery of men halfway around the world. You can't look anywhere without seeing traces of the trade. The china on the mantel, the silver spoons, the mahogany furniture, all financed by poppy fields a continent away. The city smells faintly of guilt and doesn't know it. In the clubs, politicians speak of progress and civilization while sipping gin laced with tonic made from empire's conquests. They talk about the burden of leadership, the moral responsibility of guiding lesser nations, all while profiting from their suffering. It's a performance so refined that even they believe it. The hypocrisy isn't hidden. It's woven into the fabric of respectability. Somewhere, a missionary writes home about saving souls in Canton, while the same ships that carry his Bible carry crates of opium. In London, the churches ring with hymns about mercy and salvation, and the bankers count coins that smell faintly of poppy sap. You realize this isn't contradiction, it's coherence. The empire doesn't see sin and virtue as opposites, only as investments. When the Second War comes, it's even cleaner, more administrative. Diplomats smile as treaties are signed, granting Britain not just trade but territory. Hong Kong becomes a jewel in the imperial crown, gleaming with the wealth that came from breaking another nation's will. The newspapers call it destiny. The historians will later call it strategy. But standing here, watching the smoke rise from the factories and the docks, you can only call it what it is: addiction on a global scale. The empire doesn't crave opium. It craves control. The drug is just the means, the quiet instrument that keeps the world pliant, profitable, predictable. You look at the map again. and it's impossible not to see the veins' red lines stretching from London outward, carrying commerce like blood, carrying poison like oxygen. And as night settles over the Thames, you understand the terrible symmetry. The same fog that rolls off the river fills the lungs of a dock worker and the dreams of a merchant prince. The empire is high on itself, on power, on profit, on the illusion that righteousness and greed can share the same cup. The ships will sail again tomorrow, as they always do. The cargo will be the same. Only the justification changes. You walk through a crowded marketplace where the air smells like vinegar, tobacco, and promises. Everywhere you look, someone is selling salvation in a bottle. The signs shout louder than the people. Dr. Fotheringham's universal elixir cures all known diseases. Recommended by clergymen and horses alike. You stop to watch a man in a bowler hat stand on a wooden crate, holding a bottle up to the sun as if it's catching divine light. His voice carries across the street, smooth as butter and twice as greasy. He swears it can cure coughs, consumption, hysteria, melancholy, baldness, and bad luck. The crowd leans in, half skeptical, half desperate. Patent medicines, they call them, though patent is just a word that means no one's checking. The bottles are filled with whatever the manufacturer feels like today. Maybe alcohol, maybe cocaine, maybe a hint of opium if the customer looks fancy. The labels are artful, the names poetic, the warnings non-existent. The Victorians adore them. Why see a doctor who might tell you the truth when you can buy a cure that tastes like hope? You approach a stall where a woman in feathers and lace is selling Mrs. Weatherby's tonic for female troubles. She speaks in gentle tones, almost motherly, describing how it soothes the nerves and restores a lady's natural grace. You glance at the ingredients and find tincture of morphine, laudanum, and brandy enough to make anyone graceful, at least for an evening. Women buy it by the case. Housewives, widows, even debutantes tuck it into their handbags, sipping from it like it's virtue in liquid form. No one calls it addiction. They call it refinement. Further down the street, a man with a traveling wagon demonstrates his miracle liniment. He rubs it onto a horse's leg and proclaims that it works on man or beast, internal or external, moral or physical. The horse doesn't seem impressed, but the crowd cheers anyway. He passes bottles down the line, and the clinking sound is pure profit. Tomorrow he'll be gone, off to another town before the first batch of miracles start making people violently ill. It's not just the showman, though. The pharmacies are full of the same concoctions, lined up in neat rows behind glass. Doctors recommend them. Newspapers print their advertisements between sermons about temperance and virtue. The hypocrisy is almost elegant. You can't walk a block without seeing a poster promising health, youth, and vigor in 4 doses or less. The miracle cures spread faster than common sense. Even the names are seductive. Dr. Bateman's pectoral drops, Holloway's pills, Radway's ready relief. They sound trustworthy, like friends who'd never lie to you. But you know better. Inside each bottle is a century's worth of wishful thinking and chemical chaos. You can imagine the taste bitter, sweet, metallic, comforting. The kind of thing that makes you believe it's working, even as it steals your strength by degrees. You overhear a man at the corner bragging that he drinks Dr. Kilmer's swamp root every morning to strengthen his constitution. He looks pale enough to pass for a ghost. He insists it's cured his gout, his liver, and his wife's bad moods. You wonder which part of the swamp they bottled. The newspapers call these entrepreneurs captains of industry. The doctors call them nuisances. The public calls them saviors. They're all correct, in their way. Because for every fraud who sells colored water, there's another who accidentally invents something that actually works. In between the charlatans and the geniuses, the line blurs until no one can tell medicine from marketing. As night falls, the gas lamps flicker on, casting a warm glow over the chaos. The street performers pack up their crates, the crowd thins, and the scent of spilled tonics lingers in the air, sharp, medicinal, faintly sweet. Somewhere a man is counting his coins by candlelight, humming a hymn about honesty. Somewhere else, a woman is sipping her nerve tonic and feeling the calm spread like divine forgiveness. You realize that the Victorians aren't so different from anyone else. They just wanted to believe that relief could be bottled, that healing could come with a label and a jingle. Maybe they knew it was a lie, but it was a beautiful lie, sold with conviction and a smile. You turn the last corner, passing an empty bottle glinting in the gutter. The label is half torn, but the words still read clearly in the lamplight. Guaranteed cure for whatever ails you. And for a moment, you almost believe it too. You sit in a parlor that smells faintly of roses, starch, and denial. The furniture gleams with polish, every surface immaculate enough to reflect the illusion of control. The fire burns low, throwing golden light across the portraits of ancestors who look too proud to have ever known weakness. The lady of the house reclines on a chaise, silk dressing gown perfectly arranged, her wrist draped over the arm as if even gravity must obey good breeding. Beside her sits a crystal decanter, not of sherry, but of laudanum, diluted in water, what the doctor prescribed, what society permits, what no one calls addiction. She takes her dose with the precision of a ritual. A measured teaspoon, no more, no less, stirred into her glass with an ivory spoon. Her hand doesn't tremble. She's had practice. The clink of glass is barely audible over the quiet tick of the clock. In another life, she might have called this what it is, a craving. But here, in the drawing rooms of Mayfair, it's simply medicine. Across from her sits a gentleman in a dark waistcoat, nursing his own ailment, a chronic malaise, as he calls it. His eyes are glassy, his speech too smooth to be entirely sober. He quotes a line of poetry about the fleeting nature of time and laughs softly at his own profundity. The two of them could almost be philosophers, if not for the opium-laced stillness that fills the room. They speak about the empire, the theater, the weather, anything but the ache behind their civility. This is the quiet face of addiction, respectable, well-dressed, and faintly perfumed. There are no shaking hands or desperate pleas, only soft sighs and polite refills. In a society that thrives on appearance, even decay learns to wear gloves. You notice how the lady's eyes brighten after a few minutes, the tension in her posture dissolving like sugar in tea. Her laughter returns, light and unbothered, as if the world has just fallen back into its proper order. It's easy to mistake the high for composure. Her maid enters silently with a tray of tea, eyes lowered, expression carefully blank. She knows the pattern by heart. The afternoon tonic, the evening remedy, the excuses that shift with the hours. Everyone in this house plays their part. The maid refills the glass. The doctor renews the prescription. The husband pretends not to notice. It's not deceit, it's tradition. You glance toward the mantel, where an assortment of medicine bottles stands like trophies. Each bears an elegant label. For nervous exhaustion, for the vapors, for the pains of womanhood. The ingredients list reads like a chemist's confession. Opium, morphine, cocaine, and alcohol, all neatly disguised as self-care. Every bottle promises relief and delivers escape. You can almost hear the advertisements, recommended by leading physicians, endorsed by royalty. The more dangerous the drug, the more sophisticated the packaging. Outside, the streets are filled with carriages and clamor, the chaos of a city that prides itself on order. But inside, in rooms like this, time slows. Pain is not shouted but softened, and every emotion is translated into something treatable. The Victorians are brilliant at renaming their suffering. Loneliness becomes hysteria. Anxiety becomes exhaustion. Grief becomes indigestion. There's always a diagnosis polite enough to exampled, hide behind. The gentleman checks his watch and sighs dramatically. He's due for another appointment with his physician, who will praise his progress and prescribe exactly what he came for. The lady refills her glass again, insisting it's only to help her sleep. The lie is so gentle it hardly feels like one. You can't help admiring the artistry of it, the way the upper class manages to stay decorous even in self-destruction. Later, when the lamps are turned down and the guests have gone, the house grows still. The lady sits by the window, staring out at the fog, the glass in her hand catching the faint glow of the gaslight. The city below looks dreamlike, blurred and distant. Her pulse slows, her mind drifts. Somewhere in her chest, the ache she's been silencing for years stirs but doesn't speak. Tomorrow she'll wake pale but composed, ready to host another tea, another conversation, another day of delicate equilibrium. The servants will whisper about her declining health. The doctor will assure them it's just her constitution, and the newspapers will print another essay about the moral decay of the lower classes. The irony is almost beautiful. You rise quietly to leave, the scent of roses following you to the door. Behind you, the sound of the clock continues its steady, merciless ticking. In this house, time and truth move slowly, both dulled by medicine. The lady closes her eyes, her glass still half full. Respectability has a way of forgiving everything, so long as it's done gracefully. You unwrap the lozenge, and the paper crackles like something secret. The label says it's medicinal, promising relief from coughs, colds, congestion, and nervous irritability. It tastes faintly of peppermint and progress, the kind of thing you'd expect from a society that trusts chemistry more than common sense. You pop it into your mouth, and the first thing you notice isn't the flavor, it's the rush. The chill runs up your throat, clearing your sinuses and your thoughts all at once. You feel good, too good, the kind of good that should come with a warning label. The Victorians call it a miracle. Coca lozenges, the advertisements say, for the modern sufferer in this age of smog and strain. Doctors recommend them. Priests endorse them. Parents hand them out to children as if virtue itself came peppermint-flavored. There's even a version for singers, a special blend to clarify the voice. You imagine a chorus of Victorians on stage, wide-eyed and euphoric, belting hymns like their throats were baptized in lightning. Every shop sells them. Pharmacies, general stores, even tobacconists. They're inexpensive, accessible, and perfectly legal. Cocaine isn't a vice, it's a vitamin. The advertisements call it God's own stimulant, a phrase that feels both absurd and exactly right for the century. You picture some factory worker, lungs full of soot, dropping one of these lozenges between coughs and feeling, for a moment, divine. You sit in a crowded train carriage, winter air heavy with breath and damp wool. Everyone's coughing children, men in overcoats, women in veils, and almost everyone is sucking on one of the little white miracles. The air smells faintly of menthol and optimism. A man beside you offers his tin with a polite smile. You take one out of curiosity, not realizing that this is how empires get built, one candy at a time. Within minutes, the mood of the carriage shifts. People seem brighter, friendlier, almost cheerful. The woman across from you begins chatting about the weather with alarming enthusiasm. The coughing slows, laughter rises. You realize the Victorians didn't just find a cure for sore throats. They accidentally found a cure for sadness, boredom, and social anxiety too. But nothing this good lasts without consequence. You hear stories whispered in chemist shops, stories of people who go through entire tins in a day. They start with one for a cough and end up chasing the numb, weightless calm it brings. Doctors insist it's harmless in moderation, though moderation is a concept that never stands a chance against chemistry. The newspapers print letters from concerned mothers, children who can't sleep, who've started grinding their teeth, who smile too much at nothing. The advertisements respond with even bolder claims. Now improved, faster relief, extra strength. The Victorians love improvement so much, they never stop to ask what they're improving toward. You visit a confectioner's shop and watch as the clerk wraps the lozenges in paper printed with gold lettering. The slogans shimmer under the gaslight like tiny hymns to innovation. He tells you they sell out every week, especially during the colder months. Better than brandy, he says proudly. You can even take them to church. You can't tell if he's joking. Outside, the city coughs. The smog hangs thick. Every breath a challenge. You see a mother hand a lozenge to her child, her fingers red from cold. The child's coughing stops, replaced by a vacant smile. The mother exhales in relief. It's easy to see how it happens, how comfort blurs into dependence, how science turns into superstition with just a little sugar to disguise it. By spring, the advertisements start changing. New brands appear, boasting gentler formulas, less coca, and more conscience. But the damage is already done. The factories have grown rich, the chemists respectable, and the population quietly accustomed to being chemically soothed. The public moves on, as it always does, from one miracle to the next. You walk home through the fog, the taste of peppermint still sharp on your tongue, your thoughts quick and too bright. Somewhere, a bell tolls the hour, and the sound seems both too close and impossibly far away. You can't help wondering how anyone in this century gets through the winter without something bottled, powdered, or sweetened to dull the edges. The lozenge melts slowly, leaving your mouth numb and your pulse just a little too fast. You look down at the empty wrapper in your hand, the gold letters already smudged. Instant relief, it says, in elegant cursive. You can't tell if it's a promise or a warning. You enter a parlor filled with laughter that sounds too bright to be natural, too sudden to be sincere. The chandeliers shimmer, the wallpaper seems to breathe, and the air carries a sweet, chemical sharpness that makes your throat tighten and your thoughts loosen. Someone passes you a glass of champagne you don't remember asking for, and before you can decline, the man beside you, red-cheeked, eyes glinting with mischief, claps you on the back and declares, "Tonight we discover the future." You quickly realize he doesn't mean electricity or steam, he means ether. The tables are set with crystal decanters and fine china, but the main attraction is a brass contraption at the center of the room, connected by rubber tubing and a series of glass bulbs that hiss softly. A young doctor in impeccable waistcoat and questionable judgment is demonstrating his apparatus for the liberation of joy. The guests watch in awe as he fills a balloon with invisible vapor, the smell of it spilling through the room like a strange new perfume. When he inhales, his eyes roll back, his body sways, and then laughter, the kind that starts as a cough and erupts into hysteria. Soon everyone wants a turn. Ladies in lace gloves giggle behind their fans, pretending to hesitate before taking the mouthpiece. Gentlemen line up, puffing their chests, ready to prove their modernity through intoxication. One by one, they inhale the vapor, their faces flushing, their laughter rising until it fills the rafters. The doctor calls it harmless recreation. You call it something between science and collective madness. When it's your turn, the mouthpiece is cold, metallic, faintly damp. The vapor rushes in, sweet and stinging. For a moment, nothing happens, then everything does. The world tips, colors sharpen, and the laughter around you folds into itself, becoming something almost musical. Your body feels both heavy and feather light, and you understand why they call it laughing gas. It doesn't make you happy exactly. It just erases the part of you that remembers not to be. You blink and see the hostess floating by, her gown a blur of silk and sound. She's laughing at something no one said, her pearls catching the light like stars wobbling in orbit. A man recites poetry from memory, stumbling over every other word, but no one minds because he's doing it beautifully wrong. Someone knocks over a vase, and instead of gasping, the crowd applauds. The entire room hums with that peculiar euphoria only the Victorians could call respectable. These parties are spreading everywhere: drawing rooms, medical societies, even universities. The newspapers write about them with equal parts fascination and horror. The idea of polite society willingly losing composure is scandalous and irresistible. The moralists call it debauchery. The participants call it enlightenment. Everyone else just calls it progress. The doctor claims ether reveals the true self, stripping away inhibition and pretense. You watch him inhale again, his pupils wide, his smile blissful, and you suspect what it really reveals is the universal desire to escape. The guests don't care. They applaud as he demonstrates shared euphoria, handing the mouthpiece from one person to the next like communion. The air grows thick with vapor and laughter, and something that feels almost holy in its absurdity. But as the night deepens, the laughter starts to fracture. You see it in the woman by the fireplace whose giggles turn to hiccups, in the man leaning against the wall, breathing too fast, trying to stand upright in a room that keeps tilting. The doctor assures everyone it's normal temporary dizziness, a small price for discovery. Yet you notice his own hands shaking as he refills the apparatus. Eventually the guests stagger toward the door, still laughing, though no one remembers why. The night air hits like a slap, cold and sharp, and the laughter fades into coughs. Carriages roll away one by one, leaving only the faint echo of revelry and the chemical sweetness that clings to your clothes. The hostess thanks the doctor with slurred elegance and collapses onto the sofa, sighing that science has never been so entertaining. You walk out into the street, the fog curling low over the cobblestones, and the city feels unreal, as if it too has inhaled the vapor and forgotten its weight. Somewhere behind you, another burst of laughter drifts from an open window, fragile and endless. You realize that what they're chasing in there isn't just amusement, it's absence. The same oblivion that fills every bottle and vial of the century, now captured in gas form. You exhale, the cold biting your lungs, and for a fleeting moment, you miss the haze. The night is quiet again. But beneath the stillness, you can still hear the echo of that strange, mechanical laughter. Half joy, half surrender, entirely human. You hold it carefully, the way you'd hold something sacred or dangerous. The glass gleams under the lamplight, a narrow cylinder attached to a thin, polished needle. It looks like nothing, really, just a bit of glass and steel. Yet everyone in the medical world is calling it a miracle. The hypodermic syringe, they say, will change everything. You can almost believe them. It feels modern, precise, almost elegant. A doctor's scalpel is blunt by comparison. This, though, promises control the power to measure salvation by the drop. In the hospital ward, the smell of ether still lingers, mingling with disinfectant and damp linen. A young surgeon demonstrates the device for a group of onlookers. He fills it with a golden liquid, holds it up to the light, and smiles the way men smile when they think they're about to conquer suffering. The plunger moves smoothly beneath his thumb, the needle glints, and the patient, a soldier, pale and trembling, winces only for a moment before the pain leaves his face. The room murmurs with awe. The age of direct relief has begun. It spreads quickly. Doctors embrace it as the tool that finally gives them mastery over pain. Housewives whisper about it in drawing rooms. Newspapers call it salvation through science. The syringe brings comfort faster than pills, cleaner than powders, more discreet than bottles. It's the perfect invention for a society that wants its vices invisible. Within months, pharmacies stock them beside tonics and thermometers. Addiction no longer looks like a tavern brawl, it looks like a prescription. You visit a chemist's shop and see the new kits on display, neatly boxed, each containing a syringe, a vial of morphine, and a pamphlet describing proper domestic use. The shopkeeper tells you respectable families are buying them for headaches, for backaches, for for nerves. He says it with pride, as if civilization itself now runs on needles. You imagine parlors where ladies in lace draw curtains and fill syringes with the same grace they pour tea. The sensation of it is almost holy. The sharp sting, the rush beneath the skin, the warmth spreading outward like forgiveness. The advertisements call it instant relief. The poets call it transcendence. You can't decide which is more dangerous, the pain or the absence of it. Doctors assure patients that morphine, delivered through the needle, is safer than laudanum, that addiction belongs to the poor and undisciplined. But soon even they begin to whisper about a new kind of dependence, quieter and more refined. You meet a man who carries his syringe in a velvet-lined case, polished and perfect, his initials engraved on the side. He insists he's not an addict, just a man of delicate constitution. His hands tremble as he speaks, the veins on his arms stippled with tiny bruises. He says he can't imagine life without it, but then again, he doesn't need to. The syringe gives him everything he asks for calm, clarity, sleep, and takes everything he doesn't notice leaving. In the hospitals, the miracle begins to sour. The same patients who once praised the relief now beg for higher doses. Their bodies no longer fooled by small mercies. Nurses hide used needles in waste bins. Doctors rewrite prescriptions under dim light, pretending not to see the pattern forming. Addiction no longer wears rags or slurs its speech. It signs its name with a fountain pen and thanks you politely. You think of how quickly humanity turns its cures into cages. The syringe was meant to banish suffering, but it ends up binding people to their relief. It makes the invisible, visible pain transformed into ritual. You picture the slow push of the plunger, the sigh that follows, the faint pulse of satisfaction that feels like prayer, and then the silence that creeps in after. At night, in the gaslight glow of London, you see it everywhere. A doctor in his study, dosing himself before sleep. A woman at her vanity, a single bead of blood blooming where the needle touched. A soldier back from the colonies, eyes unfocused but peaceful, his hand still clutching the syringe. The city has found its new comfort, and it gleams faintly in every window. You turn the device over once more in your hand, watching the light run along its smooth edge. It was never meant to be sinister. It was meant to save. But as the needle catches the glow, you realize the truth the century will spend decades trying not to see. The syringe didn't cure pain. It made it personal, neat, quiet, elegant, and endless. You sit behind the counter of a small Victorian pharmacy, the air heavy with chalk dust, camphor, and the faint sweetness of syrup. Shelves stretch from floor to ceiling, lined with bottles in every shade of brown and green, each bearing a neatly printed label. Laudanum, morphia, chloral hydrate, coca extract. The handwriting on the tags is perfect, the kind that only comes from hands that never shake. Behind you, a brass scale gleams beside a drawer of weights, and a faint ticking from the regulator clock fills the silence between customers. On the counter lies the ledger thick, leather-bound, its corners worn smooth from years of use. Every transaction is there, written in ink that has faded from black to brown. It's supposed to be a record of business, but it reads more like a confessional. You run your finger down the columns of names and numbers, and the story of a nation unfolds in neat cursive lines. There's Mrs. Harcourt of Bloomsbury, who comes every Tuesday for her nerve drops. The doctor says she suffers from sleeplessness. The ledger says she's been buying tincture of opium for 6 years. Then there's Mr. Avery, a solicitor who purchases toothache remedy in quantities that would numb a horse. You remember his polite smile, his gold watch chain, the way he always asked for the same brand. His teeth, you suspect, have been fine for years. The entries go on, each one a small tragedy disguised as an errand. For the baby. One note reads, beside a sale of Godfrey's cordial, a mixture of molasses and morphine. For the joints, beside a pint of laudanum. for the melancholy, beside a vial of chloral. Each purchase justified, each name familiar. You can picture them all, the tired mothers, the anxious clerks, the widows who no longer pretend it's medicine but call it so anyway. The pharmacists don't ask questions. They can't afford to. The business depends on quiet efficiency, not moral inquiry. There's a comfort in routine. Measure, pour, seal, smile. You watch coins change hands and bottles disappear into handbags and coat pockets. Sometimes, late in the day, someone leans a little too heavily on the counter, their pupils small, their words slow. You know they'll be back tomorrow. They always are. You imagine London as one enormous pharmacy, every home a private dispensary, bottles on mantels, tonics by bedsides, powders tucked into drawers. The city hums on caffeine by morning, opium by night. It's a rhythm no one talks about, but everyone keeps. The newspapers rail against drunkenness in the slums, but addiction in drawing rooms wears perfume and respectability. The ledger doesn't judge. It lists transactions with the same calm precision, whether the customer is a duchess or a dock worker. Money smooths everything into order. Yet as you turn the pages, you start to notice patterns, the names that repeat, the dosages that rise, the little notes pharmacists leave for one another. Customer pale, shaking reduced strength. Husband now collecting wife bedridden. The handwriting trembles more in later years, as though the ink itself is beginning to understand. You pause at one entry that catches your eye. Dr. W. himself, 1 ounce morphine. Even the healers have joined the ranks of the afflicted. You picture the doctor alone in his study, writing prescriptions by lamplight, his own bottle hidden in a drawer. The profession built on curing pain has found its own quiet infection. Outside, the bells of street martins toll the hour. The street lamps flicker on, their glow catching the gold lettering on the window. Thompson & Co., chemists and druggists. Passers-by glance in, unaware that behind the glass lies the true diary of their time, not written in newspapers or sermons, but in purchases and signatures. You close the ledger and feel its weight. Every name inside is someone chasing relief. Each dose another line in a national biography of endurance. No revolutions here, no proclamations, just ink, bottles, and faith in chemistry. Somewhere, a mother measures out her child's cordial. Somewhere else, a gentleman counts, drops into his tea. By the time you lock the door and snuff the lamps, the street outside is quiet. The fog presses close to the windows, soft and endless. You carry the ledger to the back room and set it on a shelf beside years of others, the spines lined up like gravestones. Tomorrow the pages will continue to fill, the handwriting steady, the silence unbroken. It isn't scandal or sin that defines the age. It's dependence, polite and well documented. And in the neat lines of ink, beneath the calm arithmetic of commerce, you can almost hear the heartbeat of a nation dosing itself into stillness. You sit in a drawing room where everything gleams: the porcelain cups, the silver spoons, the eyes of the women who've learned how to hold their composure and their addictions in the same gloved hand. The air smells faintly of roses, starch, and something sweeter, heavier. Laughter drifts like perfume, timed perfectly with the clink of china. Every gesture is refined, every word chosen with the same precision as a teaspoon of syrup. You watch as Mrs. Whitmore pours tea from a delicate pot, painted with forget-me-nots. She moves with practiced elegance, though her fingers tremble slightly as she reaches for the sugar bowl. Or maybe it isn't sugar she's thinking about. Beside her saucer sits a small bottle, dark glass, corked, unassuming, tinctura opii. She doesn't hide it. She doesn't have to. It's medicine, after all. Everyone here knows that. Lady Pembroke is already 1 dose ahead. She speaks quickly, her voice a silken thread wound too tight, recounting some story about her husband's latest speech in Parliament. Her laughter comes too easily, her pupils too wide for daylight. The others nod and sip and smile, pretending not to notice that she's halfway between composure and collapse. The conversation flows the way the laudanum does, measured, soothing, faintly, numbing. Someone mentions the latest scandal in the papers, and the table ripples with polite amusement. Another sighs about the strain of womanhood, her tone light but her hand already reaching for her own little vial. It's always framed as a necessity, never indulgence. A lady can't show weakness, but she can take medicine. And in this house, medicine is amber-colored and tastes faintly of poppy and guilt. You realize that what binds these women together isn't friendship or fashion, it's fatigue. The exhaustion of holding up a world that tells them to be fragile and flawless at once. Their husbands have politics, their sons have schools, their daughters have finishing tutors. The women have tinctures, they have the ritual: pour, stir, sip, smile, repeat. A maid enters with a tray of scones, her eyes downcast. She sets them quietly among the cups, careful not to disturb the delicate rhythm of the room. She's seen it all before: the faint glaze over the eyes, the flushed cheeks, the way conversation meanders just slightly off course before someone clears their throat and steers it back to safer ground. She knows when to refill the tea and when to leave the bottle where it lies. Mrs. Whitmore leans toward you, her perfume a mixture of violet and brandy, and confides that she takes laudanum for her nerves. You nod, because that's what one does, though she's already moving on to how it helps her sleep, how it quiets the buzzing in her head. "It's quite miraculous," she says, her voice dreamy, her spoon tracing circles in her cup. You can't tell whether she's stirring sugar or chasing thoughts. At another end of the table, Miss Davenport begins reciting a line of Tennyson, then forgets halfway through and laughs it off. "It's this dreadful fog," she says, though you suspect the fog isn't outside. The others murmur in agreement. One adds that the city's air is enough to make anyone ill. No one mentions that the cure has made them sicker. The afternoon stretches like taffy, slow and golden. The conversation turns to children, fashion, the latest recipe for plum cake. The bottles are discreetly tucked into reticules or slipped beneath napkins, though everyone knows they're there. The laughter becomes gentler now, blurred around the edges. It feels like warmth, like safety, like forgetting. Outside, a carriage clatters by, and for a moment, every head turns toward the window. The light catches their faces, beautiful, brittle, faintly translucent. You think of stained glass, radiant from afar, fragile up close. The illusion is flawless until the next wave of weariness hits, and someone quietly reaches for the bottle again. By the time the clock chimes 4, the room is soft with silence. The tea has gone cold. The air is heavy with perfume and poppy. The ladies sit back, eyes half-lidded, smiles faint and far away. Someone murmurs that it's time to go, but no one moves. They linger in that sweet, suspended space between conversation and sleep, between pretense and peace. As you leave, you glance back at the table, the cups, the crumbs, the half-empty bottles glinting like little secrets in the afternoon light. Outside, the world moves briskly, unaware that inside these polished walls, the empire's most respectable women are quietly drifting, one drop at a time, into the calm they can't find anywhere else. You sit in the dim light of a surgery, where the smell of carbolic acid and pipe smoke lingers over the hum of quiet exhaustion. The doctor sits across from you, sleeves rolled, collar loosened, eyes the color of sleepless nights. His desk is buried beneath ledgers, half-empty bottles, and folded prescriptions waiting for signatures. A brass lamp casts a warm glow over it all, making the morphine ampules gleam like jewels. He stares at them longer than he should. He's a man of science, he reminds himself often, a healer, a professional. His duty is to ease suffering, not to profit from it. But in the dim hours, that distinction feels fragile. Every bottle on his shelf blurs the line further. Tinctura opii, Chloral hydrate, morphinum. The handwriting on the labels is his own, careful and confident, the way it was when he still believed that medicine could save everyone. You watch as he prepares a dose for a patient, a young woman with dark circles beneath her eyes, trembling from pain that has no name. Nerves, the diagnosis says, though no one really knows what that means. He measures the morphine carefully, his hands steady, his voice calm. "Just a touch," he says softly, as though speaking to both of you. The needle glides beneath her skin, and the tension drains from her body. Her breathing slows, her eyes flutter closed, and for a moment, the room feels peaceful. The doctor exhales too, a mirror of her relief. He's done his job. That's all this is, his job. But when she leaves, her footsteps hesitant, he refills his own syringe from the same bottle. Just a touch, he tells himself again. The same reassurance, different patient. The amber liquid slides into his veins, and the world steadies. The ache in his hands fades. The fatigue in his head dissolves. The pain of knowing he cannot cure half the things people bring him. The headaches, the hysteria, the endless sadness softens into something tolerable. For a few hours, he can believe he's fixing more than he's failing. He isn't alone. You hear the same stories whispered in medical circles, at lectures and conferences and smoky back rooms. Doctors treating themselves, doctors dosing their families, doctors prescribing with such generosity that treatment becomes something closer to indulgence. The profession that once looked down on the apothecary now deals in the same illusions, just wrapped in Latin and respectability. You picture a city full of doctors like him, each surrounded by the quiet wreckage of good intentions. One prescribes laudanum to a mother for her female troubles. Another injects morphine into a soldier to ease his phantom pain. Another takes his own nightly dose, not out of weakness, but out of habit, and the line between empathy and dependence fades a little more. It's hard to judge addiction when you share it. He still lectures young students on moderation, still signs certificates declaring patients fit for society. But his hands shake when he writes, and the tremor deepens with every week. The local chemist stops asking questions, simply filling his orders with the same discretion he shows all the respectable addicts in town. The bottles come sealed, the ledger grows heavier, and no one speaks the word addiction. They call it medical necessity. At night, he sits alone in his office, staring at the portraits on his wall. Hippocrates, Jenner, Galen, men who carried the torch of healing through centuries. Their painted eyes watch him as he draws another dose. He tells himself they'd understand. Pain is the enemy, and this kills pain. The method doesn't matter. The ethics don't either, not when people sleep easier and wake grateful. The clock ticks softly as he leans back, eyes half closed, the edges of his thoughts blurring into warmth. Somewhere in the city, another patient cries out for relief. Another pharmacist unlocks his cabinet. Another hand trembles around a spoonful of solace. The system feeds itself, doctor to chemist, to patient, to doctor again, an endless circle, perfectly civilized. When morning comes, the doctor straightens his coat, washes his face, and steps into the cold light of respectability. The waiting room is already full. He greets each patient with a steady smile, his pen poised, his voice reassuring. "You'll feel better soon," he says, and he means it. He no longer knows whether he's healing them or himself. The line vanished somewhere between duty and desire, between science and solace. But the prescriptions keep flowing, the bottles keep emptying, and London keeps sleeping easier on the dream he's selling, one measured drop at a time. You find yourself in a candlelit room that smells faintly of ink, tobacco, and something sweeter, something that clings to the curtains and softens the edges of everything. The poet sits at his desk, hunched over a half-finished stanza, his quill suspended midair as though waiting for permission from the universe. His pupils are wide, his breath shallow. On the table beside him lies a bottle of laudanum, uncorked, half empty, gleaming like inspiration itself. He dips the quill again and writes as if the words are being pulled through him rather than by him. The sentences twist and bloom, spilling across the page in sudden bursts of brilliance. Pain, passion, transcendence, it's all there, raw and perfect for a fleeting moment before he reads it back and finds it hollow. So he takes another sip. The throat is almost comforting now, the warmth spreading through his chest like approval. Creation, he decides, requires suffering. And if suffering comes bottled, all the better. The Romantics made it fashionable Coleridge with his visions of Kubla Khan, De Quincey with his confessions of the poppy. They wrote about enlightenment, but what they found was escape. Opium was their muse, their medicine, their undoing. They claimed it expanded the mind, and perhaps it did. It also dissolved it. You watch as the poet leans back, eyes half closed, and murmurs something about eternity. You suspect he's been there already tonight. Everywhere you look, the line between art and addiction blurs. Painters mix their pigments with turpentine and their nights with ether. Novelists swallow powders to steady the nerves that writing unsteadies. Critics praise the genius without mentioning the glass bottles beside the inkwells. Society loves its suffering artists, so long as the suffering stays beautiful. The poet's landlady knocks once, twice, her voice muffled through the door. "Sir, it's been 3 days since you've eaten." He doesn't answer. The laudanum answers for him, with its soft insistence that the body is an afterthought. His hand trembles slightly, not from hunger, but from withdrawal sneaking in between doses. He curses it quietly, calls it Muse's revenge. Then he drinks again, because nothing good ever came from being sober long enough to feel ordinary. You drift through the room, past manuscripts stacked high and yellowed by candle soot. The air hums with verses half written and promises half kept. You realize that every masterpiece in here has a chemical footprint, a residue of opium, alcohol, and insomnia. The Victorians would call it vice. The poets call it vision. But as the night deepens, even the visions grow weary. The poet's pen scratches slower now. His words lose rhythm. His genius starts to slur. He stares at the final line of his poem, eyes glazed, and wonders whether it's good or if he's just too numb to care. He reads it aloud to no one, the syllables trembling in the air like ghosts of thought. He laughs once, quietly, then sinks back in his chair, the candlelight flickering over his face. You realize the laughter isn't joy, it's relief, the kind that comes when you've escaped everything, even yourself. Outside, London murmurs carriages on cobblestones, distant laughter from a tavern, a city pretending it isn't addicted to its own illusions. Inside, the poet dreams of golden palaces, wide rivers, and the peace that never lasts beyond the first few lines of the next poem. Tomorrow he'll wake pale and hollow, rereading what he wrote, and wondering who the brilliant stranger was that left it behind. He'll promise to stop, to write sober, to feel again, and by evening, he'll pour another glass. Art forgives almost everything. The readers will never see the shaking hands, the empty bottles, the long silences between bursts of beauty. They'll only see the words clean, aching, immortal. They'll quote him, idolize him, say he captured truth, and in a way, he did, just not the kind anyone wants to live in. The candle burns low, the ink dries, and the last line glows faintly on the page. Outside, dawn begins to bleed into the fog. The poet stirs once, the bottle still within reach, and whispers to no one in particular that it was worth it. You watch the light touch the paper, the words soft and trembling, and you can't tell if they belong to a genius or a ghost. You step into the lunchroom just as the whistle shrieks through the factory, a sound sharp enough to split thought in half. The air is thick with steam, sweat, and the metallic tang of machinery that never quite sleeps. Men and women pour in from the floor, faces smudged with soot, hands trembling from the rhythm of endless motion. They sit shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches, unwrapping bread, cheese, and something much stronger hidden in tin flasks. This is the Victorian working man's paradise, or what passes for it. You can feel the exhaustion humming under their laughter. 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, the constant clatter of gears and belts. But in this room, for a brief half hour, they have something the machines don't: choice. And most choose a pick-me-up. The men sip gin, the women spoon sugar into thick black tea, and both pretend that warmth is enough to keep the ache from setting in. Somewhere down the line, a boy barely old enough to shave stirs his tea with trembling fingers. He's added something extra, a dash of cocaine-laced tonic, sold as a stomach remedy, but known among his mates as pep in a bottle. You catch the label as he sets it down. Vin Mariani, wine fortified with coca leaves, the same stuff the rich drink to stay poetic, only watered down for the masses. It gives him color in his cheeks and light in his eyes. His foreman doesn't mind, so long as he keeps pace. Efficiency forgives all sins. The women share bottles of nerve tonics, the kind sold by traveling chemists who promise vitality and cure all comfort. Most are mixtures of caffeine, alcohol, and a pinch of morphine strong enough to numb hunger, weak enough to sell without scandal. They swallow quickly, like medicine, then joke about it being ladylike lightning. One woman laughs too loud, her face flushed, her words tumbling faster than she can catch them. Another hushes her with a grin, but there's no judgment here. Everyone understands what it takes to stay upright. A man in the corner pulls a flask from his coat and offers a sip around the table. "Doctor's orders," he says, to scattered laughter. The flask burns its way down, leaving warmth that feels almost holy. Alcohol is cheaper than food, more reliable than wages, and easier to find than rest. The reformers can write all the pamphlets they like. Nothing beats the taste of forgetting when your body belongs to the factory bell. You glance toward the window, where the fog presses against the glass like a living thing. Outside, chimneys belch gray smoke into a sky already tired of it. Inside, the workers keep their spirits high through chemistry, caffeine, coca, gin, whatever it takes to keep the rhythm of progress from crushing them entirely. The Industrial Revolution runs on steam, steel, and stimulants. A foreman strolls in, clipboard under his arm, his mustache neat enough to belong to a sermon. He's not here to scold. He just pours himself a cup of tea and spikes it with something clear from a hip flask. "Long hours," he mutters, as if excusing himself from the same morality he enforces. The workers nod in silent solidarity. Everyone's running on fumes and fortitude. You notice how the energy rises after each sip. The laughter grows louder, the gestures looser. The men slap the tables. The women talk over one another. For a moment, the fatigue evaporates, replaced by the illusion of endurance. They believe they can work forever. That belief is worth more to the factory than any machine. When the whistle sounds again, the room empties in a rush of motion and noise. Cups clatter, benches scrape, flasks vanish into pockets. The workers file back to the floor, 1,000 tiny engines of human will, fueled by sugar, spirits, and science. The boy with the coca wine grins as he wipes his mouth, then disappears into the haze of gears. You stay behind for a moment, the echo of their chatter fading into the rhythmic pounding of the factory. On the table sits a single bottle left behind, label peeling, its last drops glinting amber in the light. Energy, focus, relief. The words are printed in gold, bold and comforting. You can almost hear the hum of progress in them. Then the machines start again, their roar swallowing everything. The city breathes in smoke and exhales labor, and somewhere beneath it all, the quiet. The pulse of the people continues quickened, caffeinated, and just steady enough to keep the empire running. You stand on a London street corner as the newspaper boys shout headlines into the fog. Their voices cut through the clatter of horses and the hiss of rain on cobblestones. "New scourge of the nation," one cries, waving a crumpled sheet of ink-stained paper. Another yells, "Opium dens of death." The words sell faster than truth ever could. The city that once sold drugs in every pharmacy now pretends it's shocked to find them everywhere. You buy a paper and read beneath the gaslight, the print still damp and smelling of oil and panic. Foreigners bringing poison to our shores, respectable women falling prey to the poppy, children in peril. The stories bleed together in a feverish rhythm, moral outrage masquerading as journalism. The public, having long depended on its tinctures and tonics, suddenly finds comfort in fear. It's not the bottles that changed, only the story. Across town, in the editor's office, a man in shirt sleeves leans over his desk, quill scratching like a blade. He knows exactly how to write it. Danger, depravity, a whiff of scandal. Nothing sells like virtue under siege. He's never seen an opium den, but he's heard enough from a constable's cousin to fill 3 columns. He imagines shadowy rooms filled with smoke, English innocence corrupted by the exotic East. The truth quiet, dull, domestic won't move papers, but fear will. Soon every headline hums with hysteria. Opium dens become the haunted cathedrals of vice, populated by trembling maidens and leering villains. Mothers clutch their pearls, politicians call for reform, and chemists quietly water down their tonics before the inspectors arrive. It's not reform they fear, but exposure. The same doctors prescribing laudanum for nerves are now condemning its sale in the slums. Morality, it seems, is a matter of geography. You pass a street preacher on Fleet Street shouting about sin and salvation, his voice sharp with righteousness. "The devil hides in the bottle," he cries, and the crowd murmurs in agreement, though half of them have a dose of that same devil waiting on their nightstands. The contradiction doesn't bother anyone. It never does when panic feels holy. Illustrated pamphlets circulate next, cheap, sensational, and almost beautiful in their exaggeration. Artists sketch women draped across sofas, eyes glazed, lips parted, their corruption framed like art. They call it moral education. You call it voyeurism, with better printing. Children stare at the drawings wide-eyed, while their parents tut and buy another issue. The nation that built an empire on opium now paints itself as its victim. Parliament holds debates. Committees are formed. Reports are drafted by men who have never missed a dose of their prescribed morphine. They speak solemnly about foreign contamination and national decay, their words, polished enough to hide the hypocrisy. The empire, still profiting from opium abroad, condemns it at home. It's not addiction they hate. It's loss of control. The panic grows until it begins to feel normal, almost comforting. The newspapers feed it daily, each story more lurid than the last. When a young woman dies from laudanum overdose, the press calls her a cautionary tale. When a poor dock worker collapses from exhaustion and coca wine, he's a symbol of societal decline. Grief becomes moral theater, and the audience never misses a show. You imagine the city listening to itself, priests thundering from pulpits, editors hammering away at type, reformers demanding purity in a world that thrives on indulgence. Even the apothecaries join in, advertising new safe remedies made from the same poisons under gentler names. Everyone wants redemption. No one wants honesty. By winter, the fear has turned to legislation. New restrictions appear, new punishments, new promises to save the nation's soul. The addicts don't vanish, of course. They simply learn to whisper. Pharmacies move their stronger stock under the counter. Doctors write prescriptions in code. The same bottles change hands, only more quietly. You fold the newspaper and watch the fog swallow the city. The panic hasn't cured anything. It's only changed the tone of the conversation. What was once comfort is now shame. What was habit becomes sin. The headlines keep screaming, and London keeps listening, because fear is easier to swallow than guilt. Somewhere behind the noise, the real story lingers, the one written not in ink but in silence, in the steady drip of bottles emptied and lives numbed. The presses will never print that version. It's too ordinary, too honest, too close to home. You sit in the back of a lecture hall that smells faintly of chalk dust, candle wax, and damp wool, watching a man with sharp eyes and sharper certainty explain the mind as if it's a clock he's just learned to take apart. The word psychology still sounds strange, new, almost scandalous. For centuries, the soul belonged to the clergy. Now, suddenly, it's on the dissecting table. The doctor paces as he talks about nerves, pleasure, willpower, the machinery of desire. He doesn't mention God once. The audience murmurs. Some nod, some frown. He gestures toward a diagram of the human brain. The inked lines still smudged from the morning's printing. The seat of euphoria, he declares, tapping the chalk against a cluster of nerves no one can see without imagination. A chemical trick, he says, not divine inspiration. You can almost feel the collective shiver of the room, half from disbelief, half from fascination. The idea that happiness might be manufactured, measured, or even sold isn't entirely new. It's just that now, someone's putting Latin words to it. You listen as he describes morphine, laudanum, cocaine, all the familiar comforts, and of the Victorian body reframed as phenomena of the nervous system. The language is cold, detached, almost reverent in its precision. He doesn't talk about suffering or salvation, only stimulation and response. To him, euphoria is a circuit. Addiction is an equation. The same chemicals that inspire poetry or ease childbirth are now evidence of how fragile the mind truly is. The old myths of vice and virtue dissolve into something clinical, something almost merciful. In another corner of the city, a physician keeps notes on his patients, rows of observations on behavior, appetite, and sleep. He writes of pleasure thresholds, of how some patients need more to feel the same. He doesn't yet call it tolerance, but he's close. When a woman tells him that her tonic makes her feel divine, he writes, elevated nervous state. When she says the tonic no longer works, he writes, diminished sensitivity. He doesn't see morality or weakness. He sees a system responding to chemistry, and in that reduction, there's a strange sort of compassion. Not everyone agrees. The moralists call this new science dangerous, a dismantling of the soul brick by brick. But the scientists are relentless. They talk of serotonin before the word exists, of dopamine without knowing its name. They begin to suspect that pleasure itself has architecture that it can be mapped, cataloged, and, perhaps, controlled. For the first time, the human craving for relief is not a sin but a symptom. You can almost hear the shift in language across the years. Vice becomes impulse. Weakness becomes dependence. Words soften as understanding grows colder. It's no longer about punishment or redemption. It's about observation. In the hospitals, patients who once filled pews now fill wards. Nurses keep watch as they twitch through withdrawal, and doctors jot down notes with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The same needles once praised for progress are now symbols of pathology. You walk through a laboratory filled with glass and gaslight. Bottles line the shelves, labeled in fine cursive chloroform, ether, morphine sulfate. The air hums with possibility. One scientist peers into a microscope as if trying to catch sight of thought itself. Pleasure and pain, he says softly, are not opposites. They are neighbors. He doesn't realize how right he is. Outside, the world still runs on faith and contradiction. The papers print sermons about morality. The doctors quietly prescribe tonics for fatigue. The divide between science and society widens, but both are chasing the same thing, understanding why people keep reaching for the bottle, the pipe, the powder. For the scientists, it's curiosity. For everyone else, it's survival. You realize that this is how it always begins, not with solutions, but with names. The first step in taming something is describing it. The Victorians have given pain its medicines. Now they're trying to give pleasure its theory. They believe they can separate desire from disease, but every discovery seems to tangle them further. When the lecture ends, the doctor wipes the chalk from his hands and smiles faintly. Certain he's explained something monumental, the audience applauds, though most don't understand what they've just witnessed. The birth of a language that will one day define addiction, diagnose despair, and quantify joy. You leave the hall into the cold London evening, your breath misting in the air, thinking about how fragile the line is between science and longing. Somewhere behind you, the blackboard still bears the word euphoria, underlined twice in chalk, as if it's both a warning and a promise. You sit at a wooden desk in a quiet archive, the air thick with dust and the faint sweetness of decaying paper. A stack of letters lies before you, tied with a fading blue ribbon, the ink browned by time and humidity. The handwriting is elegant but trembling, the sort of penmanship that once belonged to people who still believed words could save them. You unfold the first page carefully. It begins, "My dearest Henry, the apothecary has given me another draught to quiet my nerves. I sleep too much now, and when I wake, I feel nothing at all." You trace the ink with your eyes, hearing the rhythm of confession beneath the politeness. She's writing to explain herself, to apologize, to make her decline sound dignified. The word medicine appears 5 times in one paragraph. It sounds like justification disguised as hope. She describes the bottle's glow by candlelight, the way it warms her throat, how she tells herself it's only temporary. You know it isn't. Neither does she, not really, but she keeps writing, perhaps to prove that she still can. The next letter is from a man, a clerk, judging by his neat, efficient script. "I have reduced my dose twice this month, though the headaches are ferocious," he records, his body like an experiment, each symptom catalogued, each failure wrapped in self-forgiveness. He signs off every note the same way. "God willing, next week I shall be free." The letters stop in July. You can guess why. A small journal lies beneath the stack, its cover soft and cracked. Inside, the entries are brief, scattered, desperate. 2 drops before bed. 3 now. I cannot feel my hands. The world is too loud today. The handwriting shifts as the pages go on. Letters blur. Sentences trail off, mid-thought. You can see the decline as clearly as if it were drawn on a chart. Yet amid the confusion, there's tenderness. She writes about her children, about the garden, about how beautiful the light looks through the laudanum bottle when she holds it to the window. For a moment, she sounds peaceful. You read another note, folded and stained with something that might be tears or medicine. "I wish to stop, but the stopping is worse than the taking. It's signed only with initials. There's no date, but you can feel the century pressing down through every word." These people didn't think of themselves as addicts. They were patients, consumers, believers in progress. They trusted the labels that said restorative and soothing. They trusted science more than sin. Every letter is a balance between hope and surrender. "I am better today, I think. The pain in my stomach is gone, though the emptiness remains." Another, "The doctor says I exaggerate. He does not know how loud the silence gets when I am sober." The words carry a quiet kind of terror, the fear of ordinary life returning. You notice how none of them write about pleasure. There's no ecstasy here, no thrill, just maintenance, dependence, the small rituals of staying functional. Addiction, for the Victorians, was often invisible because it was polite. It wore lace gloves and good manners. It said thank you to the pharmacist. It kept diaries that never meant to be tragic. Toward the bottom of the pile, you find a single sheet without greeting or signature. "If I could burn the bottle, I would burn myself with it." The sentence sits alone in the middle of the page, the ink darker than the rest, as if pressed harder by a shaking hand. You set it down and realize the silence in the room feels heavier now, as though the paper itself remembers. Outside the window, the city hums faintly, distant and indifferent. The world that once read these letters has long moved on, but the ache they describe still feels current, almost familiar. You imagine the writers, wives, clerks, poets, patients, each whispering the same promise to themselves before sleep. Tomorrow, I will take less. You close the journal gently, the ribbon falling back into place. The ink might have faded, but the voices haven't. They linger, soft and human, their elegance unable to hide the hunger underneath. You understand now that history doesn't preserve the victors, it preserves the survivors, and, sometimes, even the ones who didn't make it. The letters weren't meant for you, but as you sit in the stillness, you realize they've found their reader at last. You find yourself standing in a cold meeting hall that smells faintly of starch, tea, and moral certainty. The chairs are mismatched, the air slightly damp, and the walls are covered in posters that say things like, "Sobriety is strength, and temperance is civilization." At the front of the room stands a woman in a plain dress with a voice that cuts through the chatter like a sermon, through fog. She doesn't need a pulpit. She has conviction. Her hands tremble slightly as she raises a pamphlet, the kind printed on cheap paper with righteous fury and donated ink. You can tell she believes every word she's saying. She talks about mothers losing sons, men wasting wages, homes going hungry while chemists grow rich. She's seen it. She insists the quiet destruction behind the lace curtains in the pharmacy counters. Her voice wavers only when she mentions children, the ones given syrup to sleep and morphine to soothe. The crowd murmurs agreement. This isn't entertainment. It's an awakening, the kind that comes after too many funerals. You look around and realize this room holds every kind of Victorian virtue. Ministers in stiff collars, nurses with notebooks, earnest young women clutching pledges of abstinence. They speak of salvation through discipline, morality as medicine. For them, addiction is not a symptom, it's a sin to be scrubbed clean with scripture and willpower. It's a tidy theory, comforting in its simplicity. But you can't help noticing that the chemists and doctors they rail against aren't here. They're still busy selling cures that keep people quiet. One man, pale and mustached, stands to speak next, a reformer of the scientific variety. He has data numbers scrawled on long sheets of paper, statistics on consumption, hospitalizations, deaths. His tone is calm, his argument rational. "We are poisoning our nation," he declares, "one drop at a time." The audience claps politely, but you sense that his logic lands softer than the preacher's emotion. People want faith more than facts. They want to believe in purity, not probability. Across town, in drawing rooms filled with velvet and moral superiority, temperance societies sprout like wildflowers. Ladies host tea socials where no one drinks anything stronger than lemonade, though the conversation often runs on gossip and quiet pride. They collect signatures, print leaflets, and organize marches. It's reform as performance earnest, elegant, and slightly self-congratulatory. Their slogans are stitched into banners and their anger poured into letters to Parliament. The empire, they declare, must cleanse itself. But not everyone in the movement is so pristine. Some reformers once knew the comfort of the same bottles they now condemn. Former addicts turned evangelists. They speak with the trembling authority of survival. Their words carry the ache of experience, and when they warn of the dangers of the poppy or the pipe, people listen differently, not out of fear but recognition. They describe the warmth of laudanum not as sin, but as seduction. The audience leans forward, uneasy and fascinated. Morality sounds more convincing when it's whispered by the damned. You walk with them through narrow London streets after a meeting, watching them hand out leaflets to anyone who'll take them. Some workers laugh, others shrug. A few stop and read, their faces softening just long enough to remember someone they've lost. The reformers press on, undeterred. In their minds, the world can still be corrected by effort, prayer, and print. Theirs is a holy war against invisible enemies, temptation, indulgence, and the chemical comforts that made Victorian life bearable. As the years pass, their movement gathers power. Laws are proposed, restrictions are drafted, pharmacists are pressured, and public houses are shamed. The same empire that once shipped opium by the ton begins to pretend it's horrified by intoxication. Hypocrisy becomes national policy, polished by reform. You sit once more in that same hall as another speech begins, and you notice the difference now. The moral heat has cooled into bureaucracy. The passion is still there, but it's buried beneath paperwork and committees. The movement that began with compassion has become something sterner, a machine of purity, less about saving people and more about saving appearances. Outside, in the gray streets, the chemist's shop still glows softly through the fog. Inside, a mother buys her nerve tonic, a clerk his digestive bitters, a doctor his personal supply. The reformers would call it sin. The city calls it survival. You realize that every crusade has its blind spots. The righteous may preach sobriety, but the empire itself runs on. Intoxication of power, of progress, of self-assured virtue. The woman in the plain dress finishes her speech to quiet applause. She smiles faintly, folding her notes as if folding a prayer. The crowd disperses into the rain, each person clutching a pamphlet that says the world can still be saved. You stand in the doorway, watching the gaslight flicker against the wet cobblestones, and wonder whether anyone ever reforms what they depend on most. You sit in a narrow bedroom that smells of vinegar, fever, and fear. The curtains are drawn to keep out the morning light, though it still leaks through in pale, uneven stripes across the floor. A woman lies in the bed, her face gray with sweat, her hands twisting the sheets into tight knots. Someone has left a pitcher of water on the table beside her, along with a Bible and an empty bottle that once held laudanum. The cork is gone. So is the comfort. Her husband sits nearby, rigid in a chair, eyes red from sleepless nights. He doesn't understand what's happening to her, only that the thing she once called medicine now behaves like a curse. Every time she closes her eyes, her body convulses, chasing something invisible that keeps slipping further away. The doctor told him it was nerves, hysteria, perhaps grief. He prescribed patience, not understanding. Patience, like prayer, has done nothing. You can hear her whispering. At first you think she's speaking to him, but the words tumble out half-formed, pleading with someone unseen. She's bargaining, promising to stop, to rest, to be good, if only the shaking will stop. The promises dissolve into sobs, then silence, then the sound of her teeth chattering so hard it echoes in the walls. Her husband turns away, ashamed to witness what he can't fix. Across the city, there are dozens more like her. People trying to quit quietly, in rented rooms and back bedrooms, wrapped in blankets and guilt. They've been told their suffering is weakness, not withdrawal. No one has named it yet, so it remains a private madness. Families hide it behind euphemisms, a nervous collapse, a breakdown, an illness of the spirit. It's easier to believe that than to face the truth that medicine has made them sick. You imagine the nights stretching endlessly, each one slower than the last. The mind races while the body burns and freezes by turns. Sleep comes only in flashes, interrupted by nightmares that feel more vivid than waking. Food tastes of ash. Hands tremble too much to lift a spoon. The world shrinks to the size of the bed and the shape of the bottle they're trying not to reach for. Sometimes they make it through a week, sometimes less. When they falter, they tell themselves it's just one more dose to steady the nerves, just a drop to keep the room from spinning. The relief hits fast, merciful, immediate, and the shame comes slower, patient, and familiar. It's a cycle with no vocabulary yet, no diagnosis, only endurance. In one house, a mother hides her trembling from her children. She laughs too loudly at supper, pretending the pain has passed, her eyes darting toward the locked cabinet. In another, a soldier home from the colonies sits awake all night, staring at his hands as if they belong to someone else. His morphine was meant for wounds that healed years ago, but the ache never left. No one sees the shaking in his shoulders as he lights another candle, whispering that tomorrow he'll stop. The doctors record their observations in neat handwriting. Patient exhibits restlessness, anxiety, sleeplessness. They don't realize they're describing deprivation, not disease. Some even prescribe more of the same to ease the symptoms, mistaking withdrawal for relapse. The medicine that caused the suffering becomes its only remedy. You sit there, hour after hour, listening to the slow unraveling of human endurance. The shivering grows weaker. The cries soften into murmurs. The clock ticks like a pulse that doesn't belong to anyone anymore. When morning finally breaks, it feels cruelly bright, spilling gold over the bed where the woman lies motionless, finally still. Her husband calls her name softly, as though afraid of waking her. When she doesn't answer, he bows his head and thanks God she's at peace, never realizing peace came only because her body gave up before her will did. Outside, London stirs awake, unaware of what's happened in the small room behind drawn curtains. The apothecaries open their doors, their shelves gleaming with bottles labeled relief, calm, comfort. People will walk in, coin in hand, searching for mercy in liquid form. No one will ask how it ends. The city doesn't mourn its quiet sufferers, it forgets them. You step out into the fog, the sound of distant church bells drifting through the morning air, and you realize the cruelest part isn't the addiction itself. It's the loneliness of being punished for a pain no one yet has the words to describe. You step into the waiting room of a new kind of institution, a recovery clinic, though no one is quite sure what that means yet. The sign outside promises modern science and compassionate care, but the hallway smells faintly of carbolic acid and despair. The nurse at the desk has the brisk efficiency of someone who's seen miracles turn into funerals more than once. She gestures for you to sit, her white apron crisp, her eyes tired. From somewhere behind a closed door, a patient screams. The nurse doesn't even flinch. You're here at the dawn of medicine's optimism, when every malady has a theory, and every theory has a tincture. Addiction is no longer a moral failing, it's an illness of the nervous system, or so the doctors now claim. They speak of science with missionary zeal, as if chemistry itself might redeem the human soul. The clinic is lined with patients who came seeking deliverance through needles, baths, electricity, and prayer, all administered with equal confidence. A doctor appears, his mustache gleaming with authority. He introduces himself as a man of progress, his pockets filled with small bottles and bright hope. He believes the answer lies not in punishment, but in substitution. We will wean them, he says, tapping one of the bottles. Gradually, humanely. Inside is something called chloral hydrate, marketed as a safer sedative, though it will later be known as just another chain disguised as a key. He leads you into a treatment room where sunlight filters through gauze curtains. On the bed lies a man in his 40s, face drawn, eyes rolling beneath half-closed lids. The doctor injects him with a new therapeutic compound, a mixture of morphine and cocaine, a combination meant to cure morphine addiction. You watch as the patient's breathing slows, then steadies, then becomes too still. The doctor writes notes in calm, looping script, never looking up. Remarkable stabilization, he murmurs, even as the nurse quietly opens a window to let the air move again. Across the hall, another experiment unfolds. A woman sits in a metal chair, her arms strapped gently but firmly as wires run from her temples to a humming box. Electrical regulation of the will, the doctor explains. The current flickers. Her head jerks once, twice. She sobs and then laughs, not knowing why. When the treatment ends, she says she feels lighter. The doctor smiles, triumphant. The nurse notes that she hasn't stopped shaking for 2 hours. Everywhere you look, optimism hums like a fever. Clinics like this are springing up from London to Liverpool, each claiming to have found the cure for dependence. Some swear by Turkish baths and endless hydration. Others by hypnotism, diet, or cold water immersion so extreme it borders on punishment. A few doctors even use gold literally, injecting it into the blood, certain that purity can be transfused. Patients line up anyway, because anything new feels like hope, and hope, even when it kills, sells well. The newspapers call it progress. They print glowing articles about science conquering sorrow, the way steam conquered distance. The clinics send pamphlets to churches and hospitals, boasting success rates that sound biblical. But behind the paper and praise lies the same old pattern: treatment that soothes, relapses that shame, cures that kill. The patients still whisper through the walls at night, still tremble when the lights go out, still wake gasping for what they've sworn to leave behind. In one corner room, you see a woman sitting upright in bed, hair damp from another tonic purge. She looks at you with dull, lucid eyes. "They've cured me," she says softly, voice flat as stone. You ask what she means, and she gestures to her chest. "I don't feel anything at all." The nurse pats her hand and calls that progress. When you leave the clinic, the fog outside feels almost clean by comparison. A cart rattles past, stacked with crates labeled chlorodyne and Vin Mariani, bound for apothecaries that will sell them under the promise of health. The cycle continues, dressed now in the language of science instead of salvation. The empire that once fed its sickness with poppies now feeds it with progress, and people keep lining up for both. Behind you, the clinic door closes with a soft click, muffling another faint cry from within. You realize that medicine, for all its promises, still works by the same old alchemy, turning pain into profit and calling it a cure. You stand inside a chemist's shop as the century exhales its last breath. The shelves that once gleamed with amber bottles and gilded labels now look oddly bare. A faint smell of dust and alcohol lingers, but the jars have been rearranged, rebranded, restricted, replaced. The clerk behind the counter counts bottles twice before locking the cabinet. The easy transaction that once passed between trembling hands and polite smiles has become a quiet negotiation between permission and prohibition. The notice in the window reads, "Poisons and dangerous drugs. Act sale by license only." The words are printed in bold, the edges of the paper curling from damp. Outside, a woman stares at it for a long moment before turning away. You can tell she's one of the old faithful customers, the kind who used to come in for a little comfort for the nerves and leave with a bottle of laudanum tucked neatly in her handbag. Now she'll have to see a doctor, explain herself, and face questions that sound more like accusations. Inside, the chemist looks uneasy. His trade was built on trust, and trust doesn't need paperwork. He used to know everyone's ailments by heart, their coughs, their sleeplessness, their grief. He knew exactly how much tincture to pour without asking. Now he fumbles with forms and ledgers stamped by government seals. "Progress," he mutters, though it sounds more like mourning. You glance down at the counter, where the replacements gleam under the gaslight bottles of aspirin, tins of cod liver oil, powders with names that promise purity and progress. They lack the romance of the old remedies. No ornate script, no quiet danger, no faint perfume of opium to blur the edges of an exhausting world. Science has won, but it feels like the end of something intimate, something human. In the streets, reformers smile as they pass by the chemist's window, their work complete at last. They carry pamphlets declaring victory over vice, proof that the empire has sobered up. Yet the hospitals are full, and the doctor's waiting rooms hum with new complaints: insomnia, melancholy, nervous exhaustion. People still crave relief, only now they chase it through prescriptions and polite euphemisms. Dependence hasn't vanished, it's just been renamed. You walk through the city and notice the absences more than the changes. The opium dens have gone quiet. The advertisements for patent cures no longer shout from every wall. Mothers no longer keep that amber bottle by the bedside for coughs or crying children. It should feel cleaner, safer, but something about the silence feels rehearsed, like a household pretending not to miss a scandalous guest who used to make dinner parties interesting. In Parliament, men congratulate themselves on a moral victory. They talk of national health, of scientific discipline, of citizens who now face life unclouded. They never mention that some of those citizens still find their solace in alcohol, chloral, or whatever the next miracle compound happens to be. Progress, after all, needs its own anesthesia. You pass by a small alley where a chemist's apprentice lights a cigarette behind the shop. He exhales a slow, thoughtful plume of smoke and says, "Used to be simpler, didn't it?" You nod, though neither of you lived in that simplicity. You can feel it, though, the ache of nostalgia for a dangerous comfort, for a time when medicine came with mystery and mercy in equal measure. In a doctor's office down the street, a new kind of bottle gleams on the shelf, smaller, cleaner, labeled with precise dosage and sterile Latin. The patient sits across the desk, hands folded, asking for something to quiet the noise inside her head. The doctor hesitates, pen poised above the prescription pad. There are rules now, limits, warnings. Yet as he writes, he murmurs, "Just a small dose, for sleep." The city moves forward, as it always does. The chemists adapt, the public adjusts, and the old bottles find their way into attics and trunks, relics of an age that blurred the line between healing and escape. You imagine them gathering dust beside faded letters and forgotten photographs, their contents long evaporated, but their story still potent. As evening falls, the shop shutters close with a quiet finality. The amber glow fades, and the street lights hum to life. The age of laudanum is over, not with outrage, but with quiet compliance. And somewhere, beneath the hum of electric lamps and the clean scent of disinfectant, the city dreams just as restless as ever, still searching for something to take the edge off the waking world. You walk through a modern pharmacy, bright and sterile, the air humming with refrigeration and fluorescent light. The shelves stretch endlessly, lined with promises printed in friendly fonts: relief, balance, calm, energy. No ornate glass bottles now, no apothecaries in aprons. Yet if you look closely, you recognize the ghosts. The names have changed, but the chemistry hasn't. 100 years have passed, and the same compounds still whisper their lullabies, just dressed in childproof caps. You pick up a box of painkillers, turn it over in your hand, and read the fine print. Opiates, still here, hiding behind syllables. The Victorians would have adored hydrocodone, oxycodone, morphine sulfate. The formulas are cleaner, the doses smaller, but the promise remains the same. Escape, neatly packaged and clinically approved. You realize how little separates the laudanum bottle from the modern prescription vial. The font may have lost its flourish, but the faith in chemistry still glows like candlelight beneath fluorescent bulbs. Doctors now talk about receptors and neurotransmitters instead of humors and vapors. They have charts, graphs, double-blind trials, but you can still hear the echo of that same Victorian certainty, the belief that suffering has a formula, that the mind can be quieted with enough precision and polish. The old moral panic has been replaced with marketing. Addiction isn't sin anymore, it's side effect. Dependence isn't weakness, it's a managed condition. The language has evolved, but the hunger underneath it hasn't changed at all. You move down another aisle: antidepressants, sleep aids, stimulants, each one a descendant of something Victorian. Amphetamines, the modern cousins of coca wine and nerve tonics, still promise alertness and energy without fatigue. The syrups for coughs still lean on codeine, a diluted whisper of the opium dens once feared in London's papers. Even the herbal supplements valerian, lavender, Street John's wort feel like faint apologies to the old world, as if the body still prefers remedies it can pronounce. The illusions, though, are slicker now. There's comfort in packaging, in barcodes and branding, in the illusion that regulation equals safety. You can buy sleep in 30-tablet increments, calm in milligrams, joy in half-lives. Pharmacists speak in doses, not desires. But the transaction feels the same, one person seeking relief, another handing it over with polite assurance. Somewhere between diagnosis and dosage, the human ache is still the same size. You imagine a Victorian doctor standing here beside you, staring at the gleaming rows of modern medicine. He'd be astonished not by the progress but by the familiarity. Laudanum became morphine, morphine became methadone, coca leaf became cocaine, then Ritalin. Ether became anesthesia, alcohol became antiseptic. Every discovery folded neatly into its replacement, each cure quietly carrying the memory of its predecessor. The science advanced, but the logic stayed. If something hurts, there must be something you can swallow to make it stop. In a hospital across town, a patient presses a button for morphine through an IV line. The machine beeps, clinical and cold, rationing comfort by the milligram. The nurse checks the monitor, nods, and moves on. There's no stigma here, no whispered shame. The technology has sterilized the ritual. But beneath the beep and hum, the same old relief blooms a warmth that spreads through the body. A soft, detached quiet. The patient sighs, and for a moment, the world loosens its grip. You think of the Victorians, of poets with inkwells beside their bottles, of mothers dosing their children, of chemists counting drops behind fogged glass. They lived in a world still learning the difference between healing and hiding. Modern medicine, for all its marvels, still flirts with that confusion. It cures better, but it comforts in the same way. It knows how to stop pain, but not always how to understand it. The pharmacy hums around you, alive with quiet efficiency. Someone down the aisle asks a pharmacist for something stronger. Another asks for something gentler. The words haven't changed much since 1890. They're still negotiating the same balance, how much relief they can afford, how much numbness they can bear. You set the box back on the shelf, its glossy surface catching the light. The aisle stretches endlessly in both directions, an unbroken line of history disguised as progress. Behind every label is a lineage, behind every cure, a ghost. And as you walk toward the automatic doors, the air smells faintly of alcohol and antiseptic. Clean, safe, and still, somehow, the same. You push open the glass door and step out into the night. The air feels cooler than it should, sharp enough to cut through the sterile scent still clinging to your clothes. Behind you, the automatic doors sigh shut with mechanical politeness, sealing in the bright hum of the pharmacy the modern cathedral of relief. Outside, the street hums in softer tones. Footsteps, laughter from a distant pub, the faint hiss of tires on wet asphalt. You take a breath and realize the air smells faintly of rain and exhaust, and faintly still of disinfectant. You stand there for a moment, holding nothing. No prescription bag, no paper receipt. Just the echo of fluorescent light still flickering in your vision. You'd gone in for curiosity, not comfort, but it's hard to tell the difference anymore. The shelves inside had offered everything, something for pain, for nerves, for sleep, for sadness, but not one thing, for the quiet ache that comes from living too long without silence. The Victorians would have understood that ache. They just called it something else. You start walking. The city feels both older and newer than it should. the ghosts of chemists and reformers walking in step with the glow of LED signs. The advertisements in the pharmacy window promised clarity, calm, control, the same trinity of modern faith. You wonder if the Victorians would laugh or just nod in recognition. They had their tonics and tinctures, their little bottles of liquid courage and respectable escape. You have your prescriptions, your capsules, your digital reminders to refill them. The rituals are the same, only the branding changed. A bus rumbles by, and you catch your reflection in the window, tired, illuminated by streetlight. You look ordinary, like everyone else walking home through the late-night drizzle. But you know how thin the line is between medicine and indulgence, between what's prescribed and what's desired. One doctor's treatment is another's temptation. One person's cure is another's quiet undoing. The Victorians learned it the hard way. We just learned to hide it better. You pass a chemist's shop from another era. Its sign faded, its windows black. The lettering on the door still reads, "Apothecary." And for a moment, you can almost see it alive again. Gas lamps flickering, bottles gleaming, amber. The soft murmur of voices asking for relief in measured tones. The pharmacist counting drops by candlelight, not judgmental, not curious, just complicit in a shared human weakness, the desire to stop hurting. You blink, and it's gone, replaced by a modern storefront advertising smoothies and supplements. Different language, same longing. A drizzle begins, fine and cold. You pull your coat tighter and keep walking, past the glow of convenience stores and the dull throb of late-night diners. Somewhere behind you, the world of measured doses continues. White coats, clipboards, the precision of control. But out here, under the damp night sky, it's easier to see the truth. Medicine and indulgence were never enemies. They were twins, born from the same hunger for peace. One promised health, the other oblivion, but both began with the same whisper, "Take this, and you'll feel better." You remember the stories of those who tried to quit, those who believed in cures, those who blurred the line until the line disappeared. The laudanum bottles, the morphine vials, the harmless powders, the new miracle pills. Every generation thinks it's found the safe version of the same old comfort. Every generation learns otherwise. The difference is just the lighting gas lamps then, LED now, but the craving shines the same. You pause beneath a street lamp and watch the droplets glint on the pavement. The city hums, sleepless and restless. In every lit window, someone swallows something to help them through the night. Pills for pain, powders for peace, sips for sleep. None of it is scandalous anymore, just routine. You think of the word dependence, how it's softened over time, traded for phrases like management and treatment. It sounds clinical now, not tragic. Maybe that's progress, or maybe it's just better storytelling. A siren wails in the distance, rising and falling like breath. The rain thickens. You stand there until the chill seeps through your sleeves, then turn down a quiet street where the lamps glow warm and low. The pharmacy sign behind you still flickers in blue light, its reflection rippling in the puddles. You walk on, feeling the thin divide between comfort and surrender, between what heals and what hides. The Victorians tried to moralize it. Science tried to sanitize it, but neither could erase it. It's just human, the need to soften the edges, the hope that something, some powder, some pill, some drop, might make life gentler for a little while. You reach the corner, pause, and glance back once more at the faint glow of the pharmacy window. Then you keep walking, the night folding around you like a quiet confession, the rain washing the city clean for the next set of promises.